In a world where necromancers rule as the elite, a poor orphan born in a junkyard struggles to survive. No matter how hard he tried, he could never form a contract with a single corpse, becoming the laughingstock of everyone around him. But one day his eyes fell on a corpse the shop owner was about to throw away, one that no buyer had ever been able to bind. Determined to make this his final attempt, he was stunned when he finally succeeded. What secrets lie within this mysterious corpse? The story begins with a battle, a necromancer standing on the stage of a brutal arena. The necromancer unleashes his creation, a monstrous corpse named Hector, sending it charging forward with burning rage. The opponent calmly responds, commanding a grotesque creature with long, twisted fingers to strike back. The corpse launches a strike, its tongue lashing out from its mouth in a vicious attack. These magicians aren't ordinary spellcasters, they're necromancers, masters of death who raise and control corpses to fight in savage duels. Their creations are called knights, and these violent clashes have become the greatest sport of the era. Among the roaring crowd sits a young boy named Useu. His eyes are fixed on the fight, filled with awe and admiration. To him, this wasn't just a show, it was a dream, a glimpse of what he hoped to one day become. After 17 years pass, Useu, now grown, lives in a rundown house. The roof leaks and rats scurry across the floor. In the center of the room lies a corpse on a table, its chest glowing faintly. Useu chants a spell, carefully channeling energy into the body. Therefore, a crystal begins to form in the corpse's chest, and the air starts to pools with immense energy. The corpse slowly rises. Despite that, a thin crack suddenly splits across the crystal. Because of that, the light dims and the energy drains away. Therefore, the corpse collapses into lifeless dark state. Another failure. Frustrated, Useu leans back and mutters to himself, he's back to square one again. In the days that follow, he juggles random jobs just to survive, fixing things, cleaning anything that pays. After one long shift, he walks home while reviewing some handwritten notes. Because he's distracted, he doesn't notice someone call out his name. Before he can turn fully, a monster's fist slams into his face, knocking him to the ground. The monster's master, another necromancer, steps forward. He mocks Useu, reminding him that he told him to leave the city. He calls him trash, just like the garbage heap he was born in. His insults cut deep. He even mocks Useu's father, saying he was trash too. The cruelty doesn't stop. He reminds Useu that he doesn't even have a knight to his name. But Useu doesn't stay silent. He stands up, bloodied and tired, but defiant. Clutching his notebook tightly, he says that he's not trash, that only he can decide who he becomes. Still, the necromancer orders his monster to pin Useu down and gives him one last warning. Leave the city, or next time he won't just be hurt, he'll be destroyed completely. No matter how someone is born or raised, the only one who can decide what kind of person they become is themselves. The first person to say those words was the necromancer Rhal. He came from a poor slum, an orphan with nothing. He entered the War of Corpses alone and achieved an unmatched record of 6 straight wins, becoming the most famous, ultimate human in the world. Useu wanted to be like him. Even just once in his life, he dreamed of becoming the best, of being acknowledged by everyone, of hearing the applause of the whole world. But then in Useu's home, a shadowy figure loomed in the darkness, throwing insults with a sneer, each word laced with contempt, reminding him again and again just how worthless he truly was. In the necromancer material shop, Useu walked through the rows of strange supplies. He came across a woman's corpse lying off to the side. Curious, he asked the shopkeeper about the human-shaped material. The shopkeeper explained that it was a bit special. It had been put on the market about a year ago and had already been sold 13 times. But each time, no one could get it to move, so it was returned again and again. Useu then asked why it hadn't hardened and broken like most failed materials usually do. The shopkeeper replied that sometimes, once every few years, these defective ones show up and stay intact. Since they were going to throw it away anyway, the shopkeeper offered to sell it at a super cheap price on the condition that it couldn't be returned. As Useu observed the corpse's knuckles, he asked about her hands. The shopkeeper told him that she used to be a very famous mercenary in her lifetime. People said she could smash anything with a single punch. But then he added that a knight is just a tool. It doesn't think and it has no ego. So who she used to be doesn't really matter, right? Useu thought for a moment, then declined the offer, saying that a defective product that failed 13 times was too big of a risk. The shopkeeper said he understood, then added that trash is just trash after all. Hearing that pushed Useu over the edge. Angry and determined, he bought the material using every last bit of money he had. He didn't even have enough for food tomorrow, let alone rent for next week. He thought this might be the end. The chance of success was almost zero. But still, for some reason, he wanted to try with this one. He told himself that no matter what anyone else said, they could do it. They would become the best together and one day receive applause from the whole world. He began chanting. A burst of energy exploded from the house. The corpse creation had succeeded. Then the corpse opened her eye and asked who he was. Useu was stunned. He screamed, grabbed a butcher's knife, and questioned how a corpse could speak. In an instant, the corpse noticed the weapon in Useu's hand. Energy began to gather around her fist, then she lunged, aiming a devastating blow at him. The shadow from before reappeared, mocking Useu's dream. It called him trash, saying that even his life and his mother were worthless. No matter how much he struggled, he would never be acknowledged by anyone. Suddenly, Useu jolted awake, screaming. His breathing was heavy, but he quickly calmed himself, thinking it was all just a dream. After all, corpses couldn't talk. That's when he heard a voice from the shadows. The corpse, now sitting there, told him he should consider himself lucky. Her right leg wasn't working, or she wouldn't have missed her punch. Useu fell back in shock, realizing he was tied to a chair. The corpse woman looked straight at him and demanded he explain what he did to her body. She warned him not to test her patience. Next time, she wouldn't miss. That's when Useu noticed the damage her earlier punch had caused. After a while, she started to understand what had happened. She had died and come back to life. She thanked Useu for reviving her, but told him not to show himself again. She tried to leave, but Useu stopped her. He explained that she couldn't move her left arm and right leg. Those parts weren't originally hers. Then he showed her that he could control them. As a necromancer, he had to move those parts for her. Without a second thought, she grabbed the butchering knife and sliced off her leg. Then she stood tall on one foot, declared her name was Eleonora, the strongest and most beautiful warrior in the world. She turned to leave again, but Useu called out to her. Since she had been a mercenary in life and had sold her own corpse after death, it seemed like she needed money badly. So he offered to hire her and asked her to fight for him. She replied that as long as the pay was good, she didn't care about the risks. She would never turn down the job. She had a debt she absolutely had to repay, more serious than he could ever imagine. Useu calmly asked, would 80 billion gold be enough to cover your debt? She agreed that it would, but asked how he planned to get that kind of money. He showed her a poster for this year's corpse war. The prize money, 100 billion gold. He asked if she was interested. Since she was technically a corpse knight, entering the competition would be easy, as long as they hid the fact that she was actually alive. Eleonora agreed, then she immediately started bargaining. She demanded 95% of the winnings. Useu tried reasoning with her. Considering all the costs like materials and support, he offered 85%, but she didn't budge. He pushed it to 90%, thinking she might bend, but she didn't flinch. Eleonora held her ground, still asking 95%. Eventually, he gave in. The moment he agreed, she asked him to write up a contract. She didn't trust promises made with just words. Time passed and the two began practicing how to walk together. It wasn't going well. Eleonora said he was moving too fast and complained about the strange mask she had to wear. Useu explained the rule. When using human-shaped materials, at least 80% of the face must be covered so no one could recognize them. He reminded her again that no one could know she was truly alive. Just then, someone called Useu's name. It was the same woman who had beaten him up earlier. She reminded him of the warning to leave the city she gave before. Her eyes landed on the knight beside him, and she insulted Eleonora, saying the knight looked like trash, just like Useu, ugly and pathetic. She laughed, saying it would be more fun to watch him get crushed in the competition. Then she started walking away, saying she would let him go for now. Out of nowhere, Eleonora commented, says the one who looks like a skin tag. The necromancer heard that and wasn't about to let it slide. Useu quickly whispered to Eleonora to stay quiet, but it was too late. The damage was done. Instead of calming things down, he doubled down, throwing another insult that only made it worse. Furious, the female necromancer sent her corpse knight to attack. Without hesitation, Eleonora entered battle mode and charged in. The two corpse knights clashed instantly, both aiming to land the first punch. Kalina was a necromancer with a fair amount of talent, nothing exceptional, but more than enough to place her above most. With moderate effort, she achieved moderate results. That was her rhythm, and she used those modest accomplishments as a way to look down on others, especially those who struggled harder yet stayed beneath her. It gave her a sense of superiority, her greatest joy in life. In that sense, someone like Useu, who despite being a so-called piece of trash worked tirelessly yet remained below her, was the perfect prey, the perfect toy. Emphasis on was. Back in the present, Kalina stood frozen, her eyes locked on the scene before her, her own corpse knight completely obliterated by Eleonora's attack. Kalina and her companion were both stunned, unable to comprehend what they were seeing. Useu, standing with quiet confidence and a mocking tone, asked if she had a problem. But Kailina, gripped by fear as she stared at Eleonora, found herself speechless. Later, in a narrow alleyway, Useu scolded Eleonora for fighting outside of the tournament. He reminded her that it was strictly prohibited, but Eleonora showed no regret. She told him not to order her around. Regaining his composure, Useu clarified it wasn't an order, it was a request. He then reminded her that he was the expert when it came to the War of Corpses, and that she should remember the debt she needed to repay. They couldn't afford unnecessary risks. At the registration site, Useu demonstrated his corpse knight's movements. Eleonora moved clumsily, her motions stiff and unrefined. Still, the examiners approved the entry. While it was obvious she barely passed the basics, they needed participants to fill the lower ranks anyway. Later, Useu stood proudly in his necromancer's uniform. He'd waited 17 years for this moment. As he adjusted the fabric and spoke with Eleonora, an announcement echoed across the facility, summoning all players to the arena. Soon the massive arena was filled. Necromancers, strange corpses, knights, far more than anyone expected. Everyone stood, waiting. Then a deep voice rang out across the Colosseum. It spoke about names, how they lasted longer than flesh. Bodies withered, bones turned to dust, but a name could outlive it all. Some names might only echo for years. Others would live on for centuries, even millennia. In this cruel and glorious battlefield called the War of Corpses, the speaker hoped that such a name would rise again, a name that would never be forgotten. The voice addressed the full gathering, 304 necromancers. It challenged them. Were they ready to enter this war, to offer their very souls, to carve their stories into eternity? The arena answered with a roaring cry of resolve. And with that, the announcement came. The 145th War of Corpses had officially begun. The crowd exploded with cheers. The energy shook the ground itself. The battlefield trembled under the weight of anticipation. Then came the explanation for the preliminary round. It was designed to spotlight new players and give them a chance to be seen. The format was clear but brutal. Every necromancer would be matched at random. To advance, one needed 2 wins, but with 4 losses, they would be instantly eliminated. The first matchups were decided by positioning. Anyone standing on the black lines would face the person directly behind them. Useu stood on one of those marked lines. He turned slowly to see who was behind him. A man stood there tall, with a massive corpse knight towering beside him. The man looked at Useu and spoke. He asked if Useu thought he looked ugly and disgusting. Then he declared that he would show Useu the ultimate form of beauty, something he had created himself, and he promised that Useu would acknowledge it. Useu replied to the man behind him, explaining that he had been looking at his corpse knight. He mentioned it looked well made and began praising the design and structure of the knight, complimenting its craftsmanship. Then he confidently stated that even if it was a strong knight, he still intended to win. He wished for a good match and reached out for a handshake. The man accepted it and commented that it was the first time someone had offered him a handshake. It surprised him that Useu didn't seem to care about his face at all. The preliminary rounds of the War of Corpses began. The tournament would go through 3 rounds, and only 1,000 players would advance to the main round. The rules for each preliminary round changed every time, making it hard for participants to prepare in advance. Before the fight, Useu handed Eleonora a communication device. He had modified its appearance slightly. If she wore it on her ear, it would allow them to talk within a 300-meter range. The device was designed to transmit sound at a steady volume using resonance magic, so only the wearer could hear it. Eleonora tested it by covering her mouth and whispering, and Useu confirmed that he could still hear her clearly. Eleonora then asked if communication checks wouldn't catch something like this. Useu explained that the competition valued the individuality of each necromancer, so accessories like this were generally allowed. Also, since the arena was sealed with a strong magic circle that blocked outside communication, their device was allowed. It only worked inside the field, not outside of it. The match began. Useu walked up to the platform while Eleonora stepped into the arena. Since it was only the preliminary stage for unknown participants, the stands were empty. No crowd, no cheers, just silence. The overseer gave brief instructions to both sides, then raised a hand and signaled for the battle to begin. Eleonora dashed forward to attack, but stumbled and fell. It was clear they weren't synchronized. One of them was too fast while the other moved too slow. They couldn't coordinate their movements. Eleonora quickly said she'd go with her own style and told Useu to just keep up. Without waiting, she jumped straight toward the enemy knight. The opponent's knight looked like a frog, but it didn't give her a chance. It leapt away. Useu reminded her that the key to victory was destroying the opponent's Knight Core, which looked like a red bead. At the same time, they had to protect their own Knight's Core. Their strength lay in a powerful single-hit attack during close combat, but they had very few defensive options. So he suggested they start by carefully analyzing the enemy's attack patterns. But Eleonora disagreed. She said wasting time would only give their opponent more space to plan, which was a disadvantage for them, especially since they couldn't even run properly yet. Then she rushed in again, trying to close the distance, jumping toward the frog-like knight. But again, the frog knight kept dodging. Useu watched carefully. He noticed that Eleonora wasn't trying to coordinate with him at all. She kept charging in with only one functioning arm and leg, which made her slow and easy to predict. But something else caught his attention. The opponent's knight wasn't attacking. It was only running away. Then Useu's eyes shifted to the frog knight's back. There were strange round objects attached to it. The opposing necromancer spoke. He said, "Is that all you've got?" Then he explained that sometimes strong players hide among the unknowns, so he took time to observe. But now, he decided Useu wasn't worth the effort and said he would end the match. One of the orbs on the frog's back popped up, revealing a human-like face. The necromancer proudly announced that he had created the ultimate beauty. Eleonora asked Useu if faces weren't supposed to be 80% covered. The necromancer explained. He said it wasn't a normal human face. It was a face he had developed through years of research, a result of carefully calculated proportions. It was, according to him, the most ideal and perfect form, his version of beauty. And because it wasn't the face of any real person, he said there was no rule requiring it to be hidden. He had told them to witness its beauty just before it exploded. The frog knight's face began to contract inward, a clear signal of an impending attack. Useu recognized it immediately that it was an explosive. He called out for Eleonora to dodge, but it was already too late. The creature launched its face, and the blast erupted right in front of her. It was revealed that Useu had taken control of Eleonora's arm and forced it to explode just before the enemy's attack made contact, sacrificing her arm in the process. Eleonora asked if the enemy necromancer could also control the face. Useu explained that any body part separated from a knight couldn't be controlled and would only stay active for a short time, meaning the bomb's trajectory would always be a straight line. He also added that the explosion seemed to be caused by a mix of enzymes from poisonous amphibians, the kind that only detonated upon strong, sudden impact. Eleonora understood that all they needed to do was dodge. The frog knight fired another shot, which she swiftly avoided. As she moved, she admitted she was starting to enjoy the fight. Another shot exploded near her feet, throwing her backward. The frog continued launching explosion after explosion, and then jumped high into the air, releasing 3 more face bombs. Eleonora dodged them, though she struggled to run properly. Just as another face bomb appeared before her, about to strike, Useu used his control over her leg to launch her away from the blast, saving her once again. Useu then told her they were at their limit. If she couldn't run properly, they had no chance of winning. He had been analyzing their lack of coordination, and the biggest issue was trust. Her right leg, which wasn't originally hers, existed physically but not mentally. It was only natural that she kept leaning away from it, which threw off her entire balance every time she tried to run. He told her to trust him and stop focusing on that leg. But Eleonora replied that she didn't trust comrades who didn't risk their lives with her. She was the one fighting out there, not him. He was just flicking his fingers from a safe distance, while she was the one putting her life on the line. More explosions came, and again, she was thrown back. That's when Useu told her this was his last chance. He had been born in a garbage dump that everyone despised. Labeled the son of trash, he grew up constantly looked down upon, especially because of his so-called father. He spent his entire life being ignored. No one could understand what it felt like to live knowing every part of himself was seen as worthless trash. Then the shadow from his dreams appeared once more. He said he couldn't go on unless he proved to that man and to the entire world that they were wrong, that he could become the best. If he failed, he had no reason to live. Meeting Eleonora, he said, was the only chance he had left. He wouldn't ask for her trust, but he begged her to trust in his desperation. At that moment, another attack flew toward Eleonora. She turned and started to run, finally shifting control to her right leg and moving properly. Useu noticed the change. She wasn't holding back anymore. She was trusting him. Eleonora made it clear not to get the wrong idea. She didn't care about his past. He had already saved her twice, and now she was simply betting that he would do it again. Then she began running again, leaning into her right leg. It wasn't perfect, but that didn't matter. Even if her stride wasn't ideal, it was enough to dodge. With fewer than half the bombs left on the frog, they held the upper hand. Without those bombs, it was just a big toad. The frog knight kept attacking, but now Eleonora dodged with more ease. Her movements became quicker and more controlled. Even when one bomb came dangerously close, she managed to avoid it. The necromancer opponent grew nervous as Eleonora dodged every attack. Useu began counting how many bombs remained. Bomb after bomb, Eleonora skillfully avoided them all. Then Useu told her that all the bombs were gone and the frog was empty. Ready to strike, Eleonora gathered energy in her fist and moved toward the toad, but just then the toad leapt over her. At that moment, the necromancer revealed a secret. The frog's body held 10 spare bombs, kept just in case. Suddenly, all 10 bombs launched from the frog, raining down around her. Useu told Eleonora not to aim her attack upward, but to strike the ground instead. Without hesitation, she followed his instructions and launched her ultimate attack at the arena floor. The force of her punch, combined with the frog's face bombs, triggered a massive explosion that destroyed the entire battlefield. The opposing necromancer was stunned, completely taken aback by the sheer destruction caused by his opponent. As the dust settled and the arena lay in ruins, Eleonora commented that Useu's judgment had been efficient. He explained that with the power behind her punch, he figured the shockwave and debris from shattering the ground would be enough to trigger the bombs without direct contact. A flashback revealed a conversation between the two. Eleonora had explained that this technique could only be used once per match. It required her to pour everything she had into her fist, and afterward her arm would turn black, taking about 4 hours to recover. Useu then asked what would happen if she used the move again before her body had recovered. She explained that she had used it twice in a row once before, and that's how she died. Her corpse at the time had lost an arm, a leg, and had a large hole near the heart. That was the result. If she pushed it again, her heart would explode and she'd die for real. Back in the present, Useu pointed out that while their strongest move was spent, the same was true for their opponent. Eleonora grinned. It was time for a true warrior's bloody, close-quarters fight. She charged forward. After a fierce exchange of blows, she landed a clean strike to the Toad Knight's heart, destroying it and instantly turning the creature to stone. The match was over. Player Useu was declared the winner. After the fight, Eleonora and Useu stood together. Useu commented that she had fought incredibly well, completely dominant in that final close-quarters exchange. He said she truly was the ultimate warrior. As they talked, Useu spotted the necromancer standing nearby with his defeated corpse knight. He walked over and praised him, saying it was a magnificent knight, one that showed clear effort and passion. But he added, his own knight had been just a little more perfect. The necromancer seemed surprised. He said it was the first time anyone had called his creation beautiful or truly recognized his work. Useu nodded and pointed out one thing that felt off: the face used for the bombs. It seemed designed to meet other people's standards of beauty. But beauty, he said, was both objective and subjective. Instead of trying to please others, wouldn't it be better to express the kind of beauty the necromancer saw himself? The necromancer was taken aback, admitting he had never thought of it that way. He smiled and said it was a good idea. Then he told Useu that he would become his first fan, watch him rise to the top, and one day create an even more perfect, beautiful knight to surprise the world. Back at their home, Useu casually started calling Eleonora Ellie. He explained it was more efficient. She immediately objected. He wasn't her friend and no one had ever called her that. But after some back and forth, they made a deal. He could call her Ellie, but only during fights. I'll also call her Ellie from now on, just to make things easier. Ellie asked about their next match. Useu explained that necromancers are given a week to rebuild their knight. The issue was that opponents are assigned randomly. Then he showed her the skull he always wore, explaining it's an ID card that proves he's a necromancer. Every necromancer has to wear one, and their skull's color and shape reflect their tournament ranking. The ranking structure begins with rank 7 black, designated for first-time participants or those eliminated in the second preliminary round. Progressing upwards are rank 6 bronze, rank 5 silver, rank 4 gold, rank 3 diamond, rank 2 emerald, and rank 1 ruby, indicating increasingly better performance. The pinnacle is rank 0 onyx, awarded to the champion. Each rank is associated with a specific skull icon. Don't worry, I'll remind you the ranks when they matter. The higher your rank from previous tournaments, the tougher your opponent tends to be. Since matches are random, a rank 6 bronze might face a rank 3 diamond, or even a rank 2 emerald if they're unlucky. Useu opened the envelope and froze. The name inside hit him like a shock. As he did, the scene shifted to a luxurious room. A man sat in the shadows while his assistant read him the name of his next opponent, Useu. The man didn't recognize the name. There was no information available. It seemed this was Useu's first time participating. The man brushed it off, saying this preliminary round would be easy. That man in the shadows was revealed to be a rank 1 ruby. In the last tournament, that meant he placed somewhere between 10th and 2nd. The scene shifted to a man standing in front of hundreds of thousands of cheering people. It It was player Rhal, the impregnable wall, winning his second consecutive championship. Countless fans were sharing that glorious and honorable moment as the stadium chanted Rhal's name. Rhal stood amidst it all, reveling in the crowd's cheer. Suddenly, the scene changed back to Rhal in the present, still wearing the ruby skull. He called for Sophie and asked about the number of fan letters he had received this month. She told him it was 1,244. He then deduced that it was a 15% drop from last year and asked what the media and analysts were saying about his chances of winning first place this time. She told him that the average from 13 media outlets and 43 analysts estimated his probability of winning at 2.736%. Filled with anger, he declared that he would prove to them that the impregnable Rhal could still win. Then he asked about his opponent, Useu. Sophie explained that since it was Useu's first time, there was no data on him. Rhal said his victory chance was 99.74%, since a first-time competitor wouldn't be able to counter his techniques. He declared that to increase his chances of winning again, he needed to show everyone the overwhelming difference in power so no one could deny it. The scene returned to Useu and Ellie. Useu said that Rhal was not an opponent to ignore. He placed 10th in last year's competition and had won twice before. Then he explained there were only two ways to determine the winner and loser in the War of Corpses. The first was to destroy the opponent's knight's heart, and the other was to forfeit. Forfeiting didn't just mean surrendering, it meant giving up on the entire War of Corpses. Only results up to the forfeit match were recorded, and the next match wouldn't happen. Those who forfeited also received a lot of criticism. Ellie commented that it was crazier than she thought, basically a fight until one of them died. Useu explained that a knight was just a tool, but for her, having her heart destroyed meant dying for good this time. Then Useu asked Ellie what she wanted to do. Thinking he was suggesting to forfeit, Ellie said she had lived her whole life killing wildly to repay her debt. If she wanted to win, she had to defeat these guys eventually. Risking her life twice was nothing. She told him never to forfeit without her permission. He agreed, saying he hoped she would say something like that because this was his last chance too. He added that they had to prepare for a fight that might be their last. At the arena entrance, Rhal stood hyping himself up before entering the arena, signaling his entrance. Ellie commented on how many people were there even though it was just the preliminary rounds. Useu said it was because Rhal was a champion. Rhal's corpse knight appeared and it was massive, a giant wall-like creature. Useu explained that it was a combination of various materials and living beings, forming a living wall and shield. So far, its outer layer had never been breached by any attack. In fact, if someone attacked it carelessly, only their own weapon would be damaged, putting them at a disadvantage. No matter how strong her punch was, she wouldn't be able to break through. They had only one chance, so they needed to somehow strike the main body hidden behind the wall. Ellie remarked that it should be easy. If it was that big, it had to be slow. But as Useu began to explain why the wall was truly terrifying, because of its overwhelming size, the wall suddenly shifted and dropped toward her, massive and unstoppable, cutting off any path of escape. Useu, seeing Ellie about to be crushed, quickly used her left arm to fire a hook-like appendage. It latched onto a point outside the wall's range, and he pulled her away like a makeshift Batman grappling gun. He commented that the arm was necessary, but since it was made from cheap material, the performance was lacking. Still, it functioned as a biological grappling hook, capable of closing a distance of about 5 meters. Seeing the wall monster momentarily flip, they thought it was their chance. They used the hook to approach the wall quickly, and Ellie charged her right arm, preparing to launch an attack. But Useu stopped her, reminding her that no one had ever broken that wall. She deactivated her attack just in time, only to be slammed straight into the wall. The wall then began breaking itself apart to move more freely. Useu commented moving a knight was like delicately sensing and coordinating every tiny capillary in another person's body. Tensing the gastrocnemius pulled the Achilles tendon, lifting the heel. Failing to control the erector spinae meant losing upper body balance. The more varied the parts and the bigger the body, the harder this became. It was well known that moving large knights carried massive risks. But Rhal could not only move the wall, he could break it into pieces and control them individually. Useu had never seen Rhal move like this before. It was clear Rhal had come prepared. With focus and determination, Rhal declared he would show overwhelming power and activated his technique, Crushing Zone. The broken wall pieces began forming a giant box, aiming to trap Ellie inside. Once trapped, it would be over. Useu acted quickly, using the grappling hook to pull Ellie out of the trap. Without giving her any time, the wall broke apart again, attempting to trap her once more. They used the hook to evade and run out of the trap. Useu and Ellie searched for an opening. Spotting a brief gap, Ellie fired her grappling hook, latching onto the wall and pulling herself to the top. But the trap quickly reconfigured, shifting its shape in an attempt to trap her again. Rhal responded immediately, commanding the wall to collapse inward, aiming to crush her between its moving parts. Meanwhile, Yuzu tried to use his own hook to help them escape, but with limited visibility, he struggled to grab hold of anything. Time was running out. The wall was closing in fast. At the very last moment, Yuzu managed to anchor the hook and yank Ellie free, pulling her out just before the structure collapsed. The rescue succeeded, but the grappling hook shattered in the process, destroyed by the strain. Yuzu stared at the wall, thinking how overwhelming it was, how it seemed completely unbeatable. But in that moment, he realized something. Maybe there was a way to break through. He told Ellie that no one had ever succeeded, but also no one had ever fought while considering this one condition. Was the wall truly unbreakable? He recalled that once, a long time ago, a knight with a physical attack specialty had managed to crack it in a last-ditch effort. Since then, everyone who had tried failed without even leaving a scratch, and attacking the wall head-on had become an abandoned tactic. But what if they could deliver the single strongest attack in the world, stronger than that knight? Then maybe, just maybe, it was possible. Yuzu turned to Ellie and asked if her fist could surpass that wall, if it was the strongest in the world. Excited, Ellie began preparing for her ultimate attack, declaring that it was worth risking her life. Yuzu told her the location of the main body, about 45 degrees from his position, and that he'd mark it with her left arm. Then he told her to go for it in one shot. Ellie focused, gathering every ounce of power into her right arm. Rhal, watching from the other side, was shocked and shouted that they must be insane to face his wall head-on. He activated his compression chamber technique, sending wall segments to collapse onto Ellie. But she dashed forward with everything she had and aimed her final, strongest punch straight at the main body. Ellie's punch broke through the wall, piercing it cleanly. Rhal watched, stunned, unable to believe what had just happened. For the first time, his supposedly impenetrable wall had been destroyed. The crowd was silent for a moment, frozen in disbelief, before applause erupted across the arena. Shock turned into excitement, and the audience celebrated the incredible fight they had just witnessed. Yuzu stood still, eyes wide, taking in the cheers and letting the sound of praise wash over him. After the match, Yuzu turned to Ellie, asking if she had heard the applause. She responded with pride, believing that she had proven her fists were the strongest. Yuzu agreed, acknowledging that they had accomplished something no one else ever had. As the two stood in the arena, the door behind Yuzu opened. Rhal walked out, calm and composed. He offered a warning, stating that the public would be more eager to focus on Yuzu's mistakes than his accomplishments. According to him, people would always be more drawn to failure than success. Yuzu responded with unwavering confidence, showing a hopeful and fearless attitude that reminded Rhal of his younger self. With a small parting comment, Rhal made it clear that he would not go easy on Yuzu the next time they faced each other. Later at home, Yuzu and Ellie split their prize money for passing the first preliminary round. For Yuzu, it was the first time he had ever received money in recognition of his necromancer title. Since they had both won twice, they had officially cleared the first stage. Only the prize money from this round was subject to their contract, so Ellie encouraged him to enjoy it. When Yuzu asked about her plans for the break, Ellie pointed to her left arm, nodding that she wouldn't be going anywhere with her current body. In response, Yuzu asked her to wait. After a short time, he modified her arm and leg. It was designed to resemble her original body as closely as possible. Though not perfect, they were crafted with care. He also brought her a set of casual clothes and explained that if she wore them, she could pass as a regular person in public. He encouraged her to get dressed so they could go out and enjoy the city together. Since they earned the money as a team, it was only natural to spend it together. Ellie, slightly confused by his energy, was surprised by how he could occasionally come across as charming. Outside her room, Yuzu waited. When the door opened and Ellie stepped out, he was completely taken aback. She looked natural and striking, enough to leave him blushing on the spot. Ellie confronted Yuzu, frustrated by the way he was blushing, demanding to know why he was acting so annoyingly flustered. Yuzu, with an expression as dry as a desert skull, looked her dead in the eye and stated plainly that, from a purely objective standpoint, she was beautiful. From a man's perspective, it was only natural to find her attractive, especially since the casual clothes gave her a completely different charm compared to her usual grim aesthetic. Ellie leaned back slightly at the bluntness of his words, her voice rising in disbelief. She asked what he was trying to pull. Was this a confession? Had he somehow forgotten the strange, chaotic relationship they were in? But Yuzu's face remained unreadable, a portrait of complete detachment. He clarified that he had no intention of being with her like that. He was merely expressing a biological observation. Ellie narrowed her eyes, disturbed more by the scientific tone than anything else. Suspicion tinged her voice as she asked if he had any friends. Immediately, Yuzu replied that he was called trash by everyone. His only companions had been cockroaches and maggots. That answer left Ellie frozen in stunned silence. Later, the two found themselves seated across from each other in a popular diner. While Ellie picked at her seat awkwardly, Yuzu's gaze roamed around the room, taking in the decorations like an excited tourist. He seemed far too absorbed in the ambience for someone who was supposedly treating someone else. Ellie pointed this out, wondering why he looked like he was the one being taken out. Useu, still admiring the decor, explained that this was his first time in the diner. He usually couldn't afford places like this. He added that the skulls used as decoration were supposedly made from discarded ingredients. Ellie, giving the bony ornaments a more horrified look, realized those were probably real human skulls. She thought that was wildly insane, even by necromancer city standards. As they were conversing, their food arrived, a steaming bowl of tongue of the dead. It looked like warm slop, thick and slightly foul-smelling, with suspicious squirming bits beneath the surface. Ellie stared at it. The food was moving. Useu, on the other hand, was visibly excited. He explained it wasn't actually alive, it just looked that way. The dish was made with a rare ingredient known as ghost potato, which only grew in soil that had died and come back to life. Its regenerative starch was mixed with finely ground basilisk eggshell, various spices, and magical ingredients. The result, pasta that twitched with every spoonful. Ellie commented that Useu knew an alarming amount about the food. Useu responded that it was one of the most iconic dishes in the city. He had always dreamed of trying it, so he researched it thoroughly in advance. Then, almost too casually, he reminded her that she could still taste food and encouraged her to try it while it was still squirming, because that's when it was freshest. Ellie stared at the bowl, unease tightening her face. She picked up a piece with her fork, hesitated, then took a deep breath and popped it into her mouth. Her jaw worked cautiously, testing the texture, then her eyes widened in disbelief. Ellie thought it was pretty good. Ellie interjected. She have never had anything like it before. The texture gives a subtle tingling sensation with every bite, especially the creamy smoothness combined with the deep umami garlic. Useu hadn't felt any different. He shoveled in spoonful after spoonful, devouring the dish like he hadn't eaten in days. Grinning between bites, he shoveled in more with reckless enthusiasm, completely lost in the flavor. Hours later, as Useu and Ellie wandered through the city streets, they came upon a massive statue of a woman striking a hand pose that looked like it was yanked straight out of the Hidden Leaf Village. Ellie didn't recognize the statue, prompting Useu to explain that it depicted last year's champion, Karin Crow, the youngest winner in history at just 19 years old. He added that winners received statues placed in the central plaza, meant to inspire awe in anyone visiting the city. Useu's eyes widened as he absorbed the statue's towering presence, marveling at how incredible it was to stand there, fully recognized as the very best in the city's heart. Ellie, however, bluntly dismissed the Ellie grandeur and quickly shifted the conversation. Mimicking the statue's hand sign, she questioned why the statue was posed that way, wondering if the person thought it looked cool. She found it tacky. Useu shed light on the question, explaining that the pose wasn't about looking stylish. It had an official name, the singular focus stance. This stance, with light limb movements and simple controls, made basic actions effortless. He demonstrated the pose by controlling Ellie's left arm, pointing to his fingers, and asking Ellie to imagine them as the knight he controlled, concentrating on just 2 fingers. Taking this stance meant preparing for a real fight or mentally committing to a decision. Over the next few days, Useu and Ellie explored the city together. They caught a play at an old theater, shared something cold and creamy that resembled ice cream, and wandered through markets and quiet streets, soaking in the city's rhythms and stories. One evening, Useu and Ellie stood on a balcony overlooking the sprawling city. The warm air carried distant sounds of life below as Useu mentioned how many places they still hadn't seen. Ellie, gazing down at the glowing streets, quietly reflected on how massive the city truly was. 2 weeks of wandering, and it still felt like they'd only scratched the surface. She had expected a grim place ruled by necromancers, but this city was something more, a culture, a rhythm, almost a living thing. She turned toward Useu, realizing he too wasn't what she expected. There was a strange honesty about him, a kind of purity that was both disarming and foolish, and yet she found it endearing. Useu in turn found her just as unusual. She claimed to be a mercenary, but there was something in her manner, something practiced, almost refined, that didn't quite match the rough life she described. He started to wonder, just for a moment, if there was something more to her past. But before the thought could finish, a voice called Ellie's name from near them. Useu turned sharply, startled, his body tense. The man stood just out of full view, his face obscured, seen only as a warped reflection in the depth of Useu's pupil. The stranger spoke again, confusion laced in his tone. He called her Eleonora, claimed she had died.
The stranger stepped forward, their features soft and delicate, almost girlish. Useu froze, the realization hit him like a slap to the face. Eleonora wasn't just any mercenary, she was a legend. No wonder someone had finally recognized her. Without missing a beat, he stepped between Ellie and the stranger, his tone calm but firm as he claimed he had no idea who the man was talking about. He was just about to call her his sister when Ellie, catching on, gave the smallest nod and whispered under her breath that they didn't even look alike. Without hesitation, Useu pivoted. He introduced her as his wife, Sabrina. The word hit Ellie like a slap. Her eyes widened, breath catching as she tried to process what he just said. The stranger didn't back down. He narrowed his eyes, studying Ellie closely, and insisted she was Eleonora. Her hairstyle might have changed, her skin tone a bit different than before, but he was certain he knew her. Then his gaze shifted to Useu. If they were really husband and wife, where were the rings? Useu didn't flinch. With a casual shrug, he explained that he had a custom ring made, expensive and irreplaceable. He didn't wear it around carelessly, especially in cities like this. But he didn't stop there. With the same cool logic that made him both frustrating and convincing, Useu leaned in slightly and began to speak with analytical charm. He explained that the human face is defined by around 40 to 50 variables: bone structure, spacing, proportions. The odds of someone sharing enough similarities to be mistaken for another were roughly 0.01%. Multiply that by the world's population, and statistically, there are thousands of people who might look nearly identical. So, assuming someone's identity based purely on appearance, that, he said, was nothing more than putting too much faith in a coincidence. But the stranger didn't back down. His voice sharpened and his stare grew heavier as he insisted there was no way he could mistake someone else for Eleonora. He knew her too well. Useu's tone shifted, less charming now, more direct. He turned to Ellie, calling her Sabrina, and asked if she recognized the man. Ellie gave a small shake of her head, her face carefully unreadable. Turning back, Useu told the stranger she didn't remember him. Simple, firm. The man wasn't satisfied. He stepped closer, lifting his own fist and pointing to the knuckles. The Eleonora he knew had calluses, he claimed, rough skin earned from years of combat. He demanded Ellie show her hand. Then came the thud. A boot flew through the air and struck the stranger square in the face, sending him sprawling to the ground, blood already seeping from his nose. Ellie blinked, stunned. It was Useu's boot. He'd thrown it off and hurled it with sudden, violent precision. No warning, no hesitation. Before Ellie could respond, Useu was already moving, urging her with a sharp glance and a quiet nod. She followed without a word. They disappeared into the city's flow, leaving the stranger behind, groaning and bloodied on the ground, his outstretched hand grasping at nothing. Later that night, back at Useu's place, the air had settled enough for questions. Useu finally asked who the man was. Ellie leaned back and told him his name, Naren. A fellow mercenary and archer, he was, as she put it, a constant headache. Useu guessed if Naren was some kind of rival. Ellie groaned, rubbing her forehead like the very thought gave her a migraine. It was the opposite, she explained. She saved his life purely by chance. Ever since, Naren had been trailing after her, convinced it meant something more, trying awkwardly and persistently to court her. Useu looked genuinely confused, his hand moving to his chin as he fell into thought. After a pause, he said he didn't mind her preferences. As long as they fought well together, that was what mattered to him. Ellie gave a small sigh and clarified, Naren was a man. Useu froze, eyes widening slightly. He sat with the realization for a moment, then gave a slow nod and let it pass, deciding not to question it any further. Ellie explained that the real issue was Naren's affection. It was his obsession. She had already turned him down clearly, and while he had stopped trying to court her, he was still the kind of person who'd do anything for her. He might still be searching for them. In fact, the mere fact he was in this city could mean he came looking for her body, not expecting to find her alive. Hearing all this, Useu's expression turned serious. To him, it was obvious. Naren was a problem. Now that the man had seen his face, any future slip-up could put them both in danger. They needed to be ready for the worst. Still, for now, Naren had no real evidence, nothing solid he could use against them. Useu decided it was best to move on. The second round of preliminaries was about to begin, and that's where their focus needed to be. Suddenly, the scene cut to Naren. His nose was wrapped in a rough bandage, still swollen from the earlier blow. His eyes fixed on a sketch on the wall. It was a drawing of Ellie. As the camera pulled back, the true scale of his obsession revealed itself. The entire wall in front of him was covered in dozens of drawings of Eli. Naren stood before the wall of drawings, hands clasped like a prayer. He stared at Ellie's drawing, convinced the strange man had done something to her. He resolved himself to do whatever it takes, even if it meant sacrificing himself. He would save her. Now the story takes us to the tournament organizers. The man who had delivered the opening speech now led a group of subordinates through a narrow corridor, their footsteps echoing off the stone walls. As they walked, the subordinates presented the latest report. Revenue had dropped by 4.6% compared to last season. While ticket sales remained stable, in-city spending had fallen by 8.44%, and both investments and ad revenue were down over 4% due to weaker returns. When the leader asked for the cause, one subordinate explained that consumer behavior had shifted. Audiences were now fixated on only a few popular battles. People stayed for shorter periods and left once their match of interest ended. Their conversation was interrupted as shouting echoed ahead. A man broke past the security guards, waving a corpse and yelling for the CEO to look at it. The guards pursued him, but the CEO calmly raised his hand, signaling them to stand down. The CEO, upon being approached, calmly inquired about the situation. In response, the intruder presented a corpse knight, explaining that it had been denied registration as a player. He clarified that its stillness wasn't due to incapacity but part of its strategy, and to demonstrate, the corpse launched an attack by spitting a green substance. One of the CEO's subordinates let out a smirk at the display, an act the CEO took note of. Acknowledging the demonstration, the CEO offered a formal apology, admitting there had been no valid reason to reject the registration and that the error was entirely on their side. He instructed the guards to escort the man so that compensation and future safeguards could be arranged. After the man departed, the CEO turned his attention to the subordinate who had laughed. When questioned, the subordinate apologized but maintained his derision, claiming such a weak corpse wouldn't survive the preliminaries anyway. Visibly displeased, the CEO confronted him, challenging his authority to pass judgment on others. He reminded his team that their role was to shape not only the industry but the lives influenced by it, and that anyone who carelessly dismissed the worth of a participant had no place among them. Leaning in, he stated that human strength often stemmed from their weaknesses, and with that, the subordinate was dismissed. As the rest of the staff continued on, leaving the former subordinate behind, the CEO further ordered that the guards who failed in their duties also be relieved, and the head of Division 2 Security be referred to the disciplinary committee. Finally, the CEO issued one last command. All personnel were to prepare for the second preliminaries. This time, to boost player visibility, they would run the matches in a way the tournament had never done before. At the arena, a modest crowd had begun to fill the seats, and among the scattered voices, some were already cheering for Useu. Though the applause was far from overwhelming, Useu embraced it, raising his hand to acknowledge those few who believed in him. Yet even in that fleeting moment of recognition, the familiar shadow returned, cold, imposing, and cruel. It reminded him with venomous certainty that he was nothing but worthless trash. The shadow seized him, not just physically but emotionally, declaring that both he and his mother were beneath contempt, born of garbage, destined to remain garbage. No matter how hard he fought, the shadow insisted he would never rise above his filthy origins. Useu, now suffocating beneath the weight of those words in the shadow's grasp, refused to surrender. His arm reached upward, trembling but defiant. He declared his intent to rise to the top, to earn recognition, and to prove the world and the shadow wrong. But the shadow only looked down at him with scorn, mocking the very idea that someone like Useu dared to dream. Then with overwhelming force, it crushed him completely, grinding his defiance beneath its weight. Useu jolted awake from the nightmare, his hand clutching his own neck, breath ragged and eyes wide with horror. Disoriented, he scanned the room until he saw Ellie. As he approached, Ellie suddenly shouted, accusing him of finally showing his true colors. She had suspected it ever since he called her pretty. But instead of reacting, Useu dropped to his knees and broke down, weeping against her shoulder. Through sobs, he begged her to help him become someone undeniable, someone no one could ever look down on again. Ellie stared at him, silent but understanding. Then, gently, she placed her hand on his back, a quiet promise that she'd stand by him. The next day, Ellie brought up the night before, saying Useu had seemed out of it. She asked if he was okay and if it would affect the fight. Without missing a beat, Useu looked at her blankly and asked what she was talking about. Eli, surprised, reminded him how he clung to her, bawling like crazy. But Useu brushed it off, suggesting it must have been a dream she had. Calmly, he told her to pull herself together. The second preliminaries were about to begin, and the rules would be announced any moment. Throughout the city, red envelopes instantly materialized for countless countless participants, laying out the second round's rules. As each person opened the ominous seal, they began to read its contents. Finally, Useu received the envelope, and his expression turned grim as he read through the contents. The rules were bad news. Matches would now be team battles, 3-on-3, best-of-3 format. Ellie immediately realized the problem. They were already struggling with communication, and now they'd be at an even bigger disadvantage. But Useu pointed out the real twist. When forming teams, only one gold-ranked or higher player was allowed per team. Ellie quickly caught on. This meant more matches between top-ranked players and less domination by elite teams. It was clear the organizers were prioritizing balance and trying to boost visibility for new talent by forcing high-rankers into tougher matchups. Frustrated, Ellie asked how they were even supposed to form a team under those rules. After all, everyone would be scrambling to partner with well-known players. At the grand estate of Rhal, a crowd of necromancers had gathered at the gates, each hoping to team up with the renowned prodigy. From a rooftop across the street, Useu observed the chaos, explaining the rules to Eli. Teams were to be formed through individual negotiations, with 3 days given to finalize and submit a form signed by all members. Holding up the form, Useu flashed a confident grin and told Ellie to wait. He had someone in mind. Down below, Rhal strolled through the estate grounds while necromancers shouted his name, desperate to join forces. Ellie glanced at Useu, asking if he intended to recruit Rhal. Useu affirmed it, explaining that Rhal's unmatched shield ability when paired with their own would make them an unstoppable team. Logically, it was the perfect match. Useu waved to Rhal from the rooftop. Rhal looked, paused, and turned away, pretending not to see him. The next day, Useu tried again. Another wave, another cold shoulder. On the third day, the same routine. Rhal ignored him once more, this time muttering to himself that he hadn't fallen so low as to team up with someone like Useu. Finally understanding that Rhal had been deliberately ignoring him, Useu's confident front began to crack. Ellie looked at Useu and asked what their next move was. Only 5 hours remained before the team formation deadline. Surely he had a backup plan. But Useu stood frozen, his confidence shattered. Turning to Ellie with a hollow expression, he admitted that he'd never really had friends before. The meaning hit Ellie hard. Her expression froze in silent alarm. With only 3 hours and 30 minutes left until the team formation deadline, the central square was overflowing with activity. Around 800 necromancers had gathered, most of them still scrambling to form teams. Time was running out and desperation was setting in. The majority of players here had a few things in common. They were ranked between black and bronze, they lacked standout skills or reputation, and most had difficulty working with others. Flaws that didn't matter before now stood in their way. One older man shouted over the crowd, claiming to have 30 years of experience in the field, but instead of admiration, he was met with rejection. A younger necromancer snapped back, saying if he'd been bronze for 30 years, it was nothing to brag about, and frankly, his age just made everyone uncomfortable. Then, breaking the tense atmosphere, Useu raised his voice and yelled out across the square. He declared proudly that he was the one who broke through Rhal's wall, something no one else had managed. He called it an impossible feat and announced that if that wasn't impressive, he didn't know what was. All eyes turned to him. For a moment, silence. Ellie, standing nearby among other corpse knights, quietly buried her face in her hands, clearly embarrassed by the loud, attention-grabbing stunt. As Useu's declaration faded, murmurs spread through the crowd. Some dismissed his claim, saying Rhal was already past his prime. It was only a matter of time before his wall broke. One particularly loud necromancer scoffed that if Useu meant today's Rhal, then even he might have been able to break it. Still, despite the skepticism, someone finally approached Useu with an offer to team up. But Useu cut straight to the point. He asked what kind of knight the necromancer had. Proudly, the man introduced his corpse knight, claiming that when launched at full speed, it could pierce through 5 meters of solid rock. Useu looked unimpressed. Without hesitation, he told the necromancer they weren't compatible and advised him to look elsewhere before turning away. A few more players expressed interest, but Useu was meticulous, carefully assessing both the necromancers and their knights. None met his standards. Meanwhile, the stronger players he approached rejected him outright. Useu was too new to the scene. They didn't know who he was, and in a game built on reputation, that mattered. Maybe if he'd read the room better, tried to connect or sell himself, it might have been different. But for someone who had never once had a true companion, who didn't know what it meant to work with others, forming a team was proving nearly impossible. One of the tournament officers raised a megaphone and called out a warning. Only 1 hour remained. Any participants who hadn't registered with a team by then would be disqualified. Useu stood beside Ellie, subtly covering his mouth as they whispered to avoid drawing attention. Ellie, growing impatient, pointed out that he'd spent too long hesitating and hadn't secured a single teammate. With time running out, she suggested they consider giving up and prepare for the next competition instead. But Useu quietly objected. Disqualification didn't just mean embarrassment, it came with a 10-year ban from re-entry. The weight of that hit Ellie hard. 10 years would practically end any player's career. She stiffened and reminded him that they had vowed never to quit once they started, that they'd fight to the very end. These rules were brutal, pushing competitors beyond their limits. Frustrated, she told him to just form a team with anyone now, but Useu shook his head and reminded her, for them, losing wasn't just defeat, it meant death. He couldn't risk her life on a careless decision. With renewed determination, he stepped forward, declaring he'd find the best necromancers left, though the options were limited. Just then, 2 necromancers approached him and asked to team up. Useu immediately asked about their knights. One introduced a Keegan-based knight, a creature from the deep sea capable of releasing a special ink to blind wide areas. The other explained his knight could jam signals and launch ranged attacks using blood. Useu considered them carefully. Both knights had strong, unique capabilities, one focused on disruption, the other on long-range offense. Combined, they offered what he and Ellie lacked, defensive control and ranged utility. And with their silver and bronze ranks, this might just be the best team he could hope for in his situation. Useu questioned the 2 necromancers about why they had chosen him over the many others still searching for teammates. The response was direct. It was his raw offensive strength, his ability to break through Rhal's wall, that had caught their attention. Neither of them possessed such a decisive, high-impact technique, and they believed his presence would give them the edge they lacked. One of the necromancers extended a hand in agreement. Useu accepted the handshake, signaling the formation of the team. The trio sat down to quickly discuss coordination. Meanwhile, one of the officers announced that only 20 minutes remained until the registration deadline. Any participant without a registered team would be disqualified. As the discussion continued, Useu disclosed a critical detail. His powerful attack could only be used once per match. More specifically, it was a technique that required a 4-hour cooldown. Still, he emphasized its value, capable of destroying even a knight behind Rhal's wall, ensuring at least one guaranteed elimination. One of the necromancers hesitated upon hearing that limitation. A one-time attack carried significant risk if poorly timed, but Useu assured them it wasn't his only asset. His knight had general abilities that were versatile and highly effective in various combat scenarios. The necromancer acknowledged the drawbacks, but the appeal of that one overwhelming strike remained. The conversation shifted to battlefield coordination and how they would manage conflicting decisions under pressure. Before they could finalize, another officer announcement echoed across the area. 8 minutes remained. Useu, aware of the urgency, suggested filling out and submitting the registration form immediately. At that moment, the red-haired necromancer suddenly stood up, claiming he needed to use the bathroom. He promised to return quickly. The officer's voice came again, 4 minutes left. Useu protested the delay, questioning why the necromancer hadn't returned yet. There was no time to waste, and they couldn't afford to look for another teammate at this point. But the other necromancer remained strangely calm, showing no concern about the ticking clock. Then the realization dawned. As Useu stood in silent rage, a familiar voice mocked him from behind. Helena approached with a satisfied smirk, ridiculing him for thinking anyone would genuinely want to team up with a failure. As he turned to face her, it became clear. The 2 necromancers had never intended to form a team with him. They were her accomplices, sent to deliberately stall and waste his time. Helena taunted him further, remarking that in this era, underhanded tactics were just part of the game, and that his inability to recognize that only proved his lack of skill. She referred to the situation smugly as a negotiation failure. One of the necromancers reminded her of the compensation she had promised, which she confirmed with a nod. Helena informed Useu that all teams had already been finalized and congratulated him on his inevitable disqualification. With that, she turned and walked away with her teammates, visibly pleased with her maneuver. The officer's final call rang out. Only 1 minute remained. Useu stood frozen, his face contorted with fury, the weight of betrayal and helplessness crashing down all at once. Useu broke into a sprint, desperation in his voice as he shouted out across the square, asking if anyone was still unteamed. His voice echoed over the crowd, urgency growing with each passing second. Then, from the far corner, someone leapt out, responding that he too had failed to find a team. Without hesitation, Useu handed him the registration form. 40 seconds seconds remained. The two began calling out again, wishing for one final teammate. 20 seconds left. 10 seconds. As the officer began the final countdown, 3-2, Useu dashed toward the registration booth, thrusting the completed form forward. The officer caught it just in time, nodding in acknowledgement and remarking that it was a close one. With that, Useu's team was officially formed. The players were revealed: Useu himself, the old man from earlier, whose name was Borak, and the final member, a player named Ira. The newly formed trio began to talk, attempting to coordinate before the tournament resumed. Useu turned to Ira, asking about her fighting style, but she stood silently, unmoving, offering no response. Her eyes shifted slightly, but she remained expressionless. Useu, puzzled by the lack of reaction, questioned whether she was even listening. Meanwhile, Borak, the old man, was mid-tantrum, packing with frustration. It was revealed that out of the 8,304 necromancers who participated in the first preliminaries, 5,005 had passed. There were also 2 forfeits, and this number excluded the former champions who had been exempt from the preliminary rounds. In total, 1,660 teams had been formed for the matches ahead. As Useu absorbed this information, he couldn't help but reflect on his own team. Out of all those players, theirs had been the last one formed, left unchosen until the very end. In his mind, they were undoubtedly the worst team on paper. Still, he tried to salvage his ego, telling himself, well, excluding me, obviously, I'm not the problem here. No, clearly the blame belonged to Kalina and her Olympic-level sabotage. Because what better excuse than evil genius interference when your team looks like it was formed during a panic sale at the bargain bin? Borak puffed out his chest and declared that the team was lucky, blessed even to have ended up with him, the great Borak. Sitting nearby on a chair, Useu reminded him that he'd been stuck in bronze for 30 years and hadn't seen a single finals match in all that time. But Borak, undeterred, waved it off with a grin, claiming that what truly mattered was experience. He passed the second prelims more times than any rookie alive, and this year he was making it to the finals. As far as he was concerned, the team had just acquired a living encyclopedia of wisdom. When Useu asked what kind of knight he brought to the table, Borak huffed and unveiled his so-called secret weapon, a corpse knight shaped like a giant cockroach. He called it the Cockroach Knight, a creature forged from 3 decades of hard-earned misery. Useu and Ellie stared at it in stunned silence, their expressions caught somewhere between disbelief and concern. Borak, completely unfazed, launched into a speech about how cockroaches were the ultimate survivors, creatures that could live for days without a head, eat anything from glue to soap, and resist even the most aggressive foot stomps. Yes, they were disgusting, yes, everyone hated them, but they lived. And wasn't that, in a twisted way, admirable? As he listened, Useu couldn't help but see the uncanny resemblance. The speech sounded less like an explanation of a knight and more like Borak's personal biography. 30 years in bronze, still clinging to hope, he was the cockroach. Examining the knight, Useu had to admit it wasn't half bad. The fundamentals were solid, the balance decent, but it didn't seem to excel in anything in particular, just stubbornly functional. Turning away, Useu looked to Ira and asked about her knight. She stayed silent. Without a word, her knight appeared, a massive black cat. Both Useu and Borak blinked, baffled. Ira, still mute, scribbled something onto a small notebook and flipped it around. The note read, "It's a cat, that was it, just a cat." Sometime later, back at Useu's home, Ellie voiced her frustration loudly. How was it fair, she asked, for him to expect her to risk her life alongside a walking infestation and a silent girl with a borderline feral cat? Hadn't he said he'd choose teammates carefully for her sake? Useu, already cradling his face in one hand, sighed in quiet defeat. He admitted it hadn't exactly gone to plan, it just turned out that way. Still, what was done, and wasting energy pointing fingers wouldn't change a thing. It was inefficient. Then lifting his hand, he laid out their reality with brutal clarity, 3 options: win and rise, die and disappear, or quit and lose everything. Nothing in between. He asked her one final time what she wanted to do. Ellie fell silent, her thoughts racing, but after a brief pause, her gaze sharpened. This was it. There was no other path. They had come too far, and backing out now wasn't even an option. With resolve burning behind her eyes, she told him, no matter what happens, they see it through to the end. Useu nodded in clear affirmation. The setting shifted dramatically, morphing into a grand arena buzzing with energy. As the crowd roared in anticipation, the announcer's voice echoed across the Coliseum, booming with excitement. He explained the rules of the round. Teams of 3 would battle in a best-of-3 format. Victory went to the team that managed to eliminate all 3 members of the opposing side. No ties, no second chances. Then came the team introductions. Team 1, Useu, Borak, and Ira. Their names barely rippled through the audience, drawing polite claps and a few curious murmurs. Then Team 2 stepped forward, each member draped in pristine white robes that shrouded their identities. The announcer's tone sharpened with recognition as he called their names: Claude, Saren, Berter. The crowd exploded at the mention of Claude. As if on cue, one of the robed figures stepped forward and slowly peeled off his robe with theatrical flair. Beneath it was Claude himself, and he struck a pose so extravagant it looked like he confused a battlefield for a ballet recital. His corpse knight mirrored him with unsettling precision, a slim, blade-legged humanoid that looked more like an elegant executioner than a warrior. Ellie stared at the opposing corpse knight, slender, blade-legged, and eerily graceful. She squinted, baffled. Was that thing a ballerina? She muttered her confusion to Useu, asking what kind of twisted fighting style that was. It looked dangerous, but in an elegant, pirouette-you-to-death kind of way. Useu nodded in agreement. It was clearly strong. They quickly checked their communication channel, working perfectly. Useu, now wearing an edgy mask, whispered through it, making sure Borak and Ira couldn't hear. Quietly, he reminded Ellie of their strategy from the earlier planning session. First, the agile cockroach would be sent in to gauge the opponent's style and tempo. His job was to take the hits, read the patterns, and survive. Once they got a read on who to immobilize first, Ellie would unleash her technique to eliminate one target and tip the numbers in their favor. From there, it would be a controlled 3v2 battle. Then Useu sighed, clearly irritated, asking what on earth the crazy cat knight would be doing while they were executing their plan. Ellie, already skeptical, sarcastically questioned if that oversized feline could even fight at all. Useu didn't have an answer. He paused, then remembered his earlier conversation with Ira. At the time, he had directly asked her what her knight could do. After all, making it through the first preliminaries had to mean there was some strategic value behind it, right? Ira, as usual, didn't speak. She just scribbled in her notebook and flipped it around. "My kitty is adorable," it read. Useu and Borak were silent. They were utterly speechless. Hearing Useu recount his exchange with Ira, Ellie was visibly exasperated. The realization hit her hard. This essentially meant it was just the two of them, her and the cockroach knight, carrying the fight. Useu, with a serious tone, reminded her to prepare for the worst-case scenario, a potential for 1-versus-3 match. With that in mind, he emphasized that instead of prioritizing mobility, their strategy should center around sustained combat. Ellie's left hand, visibly modified with a sword attachment, stood as a testament to that plan. Useu pointed to the weapon, reaffirming that this was exactly why he had modified her left hand. Ellie, examining the sword, agreeing it was the right decision. After all, her fighting capacity will drop significantly after just a single punch. With no room for hesitation left between them, the two silently steeled themselves, unified in a single purpose: to see it through and finish what they started. The announcer's voice echoed across the stadium, declaring the official start of the first match in the second preliminaries. With a dramatic gesture, he signaled for the participants to begin. Borak, fired up, shouted with pride that he would now display the strength he had refined over 3 relentless decades. His cockroach knight surged forward, dashing ahead with astonishing speed, far beyond what anyone had anticipated. In a blink, it slid cleanly across the ground in a low, almost elegant rush. Meanwhile, Claude, still draped in theatrics, turned to his teammates Saren and Berter with flair, remarking that no performance was complete without music and lighting. At his cue, the other two pulled back their hoods, revealing their faces. Saren, the blue-haired player, took the lead on ambience. He claimed the opening act should be softer and more deliberate. His knight, a bizarre fusion of finger bones and string instruments, began plucking its own ribcage, producing haunting harmonics that rang through the arena. Berter, calm and calculated, turned to his own knight and gave precise instructions. Increase the spotlight intensity, activate all 17 vertebrae segments, and fix the beam at the center axis. His knight, resembling a long-necked skeletal spider with a single, glowing eye in place of a head, obeyed. It rose like a twisted lighthouse, casting a blinding focus onto the battlefield. As the music and light fused, Claude whispered that it was time to clash rhythms. Under the spotlight and harmonics, his knight began to move. Its blade-like legs glinted as it spun and glided with eerie grace, its dance as precise as it was unnerving, a ballet of death taking center stage. Borak, despite agreeing to open with cautious observation, found his pride under siege. Watching the opposing team's stage crew, the music handler and spotlight operator stand exposed, he itched to strike, unwilling to look like a bystander while the show played out. The ballerina knight spun in perfect rhythm, seemingly vulnerable in its elegant display. The cockroach knight, trusting speed over caution, launched forward in a sudden burst toward the dancer. In a blink, the cockroach was split clean in two. The ballerina knight had extended one bladed leg mid-twirl, slicing through its attacker without so much as a pause in its rhythm, and the arena's focus shifted entirely toward the center stage. Ellie immediately marked the ballerina as the main threat. She surged forward, sword ready, and met the dancing knight head-on. on. The knight's bladed legs lashed out in rapid kicks. This time Ellie didn't falter. Her sword met the first strike, steel screeching against steel. The knight switched legs, unleashing a dizzying flurry. Ellie weaved through the barrage, skin barely grazed, her reflexes slicing through the narrow gaps between fatal blows. When the knight aimed for her core, she blocked the thrust, but the raw power hurled her backward. She hit the ground hard and rolled with the momentum, regaining her footing just in time. Her thoughts snapped into clarity. The ballerina's reactions and raw strength exceeded hers, perhaps even beyond the gap of training or gear. Its range gave it full control of the space, forcing opponents to fight on its terms. Yet even with the odds stacked high, her focus didn't waver. One clean opening was all she needed. Their clash resumed. Sword and blade collided again and again, the arena filled with the sharp rhythm of combat. But mid-exchange, the ballerina's leg found its mark, slicing through Ellie's sword. Momentum unbroken, the knight pressed the advantage, delivering a fatal strike. Just before it landed, the mangled cockroach knight surged back into action, grabbing Ellie and yanking her to safety in a blur. Useu glanced at Borak for an explanation. Without pause, Borak boasted of his cockroach knight. When near death, its body flushed red as octopamine surged through it, unleashing a final frenzy. In that state, it moved with tenfold speed and monstrous force, no longer driven by survival but pure violent instinct. Ellie mounted it just as its shattered form began to twitch with barely contained fury, moments from exploding into motion. Useu processed Borak's explanation in silence. 10 times the speed. At that rate, the knight would move so fast it might barely register to the eye. The logic sounded reckless, but the sheer velocity could make it untouchable. Borak nodded with confidence, certain that at that speed no physical strike could land. He laid out the plan. His knight would charge in, force an opening, and Useu's would land the decisive blow. Useu agreed, not entirely convinced, but willing to trust the madman's gamble. With theatrical pride, Borak declared the result of his life's work. The name of his breakthrough technology, the technique destined to amaze the world, erupted from his lungs with raw excitement. Annihilation Dash. The moment the move activated, the cockroach knight detonated into a cloud of mangled metal and sparks. Shrapnel rained down. Ellie stared. Useu blinked. Neither spoke at first. Then both turned toward Borak, disappointment dripping from their expressions like cold rain. Under Useu's pointed glare, Borak's grin twitched and cracked. He sighed, slumping slightly as if the weight of the moment finally landed. With a weak shrug, he admitted defeat. The technique had never worked, not once. Still, he genuinely believed this time would be different. Instead, all it had annihilated was itself. Claude watched the explosion with disdain and called the display a shabby excuse for a performance. He reminded them of their roles. As villains, their job was to make the protagonist shine, and this mess failed to deliver. He expected more from the second act. At his cue, the ballerina knight transformed. Extra limbs resembling arms unfolded from its stomach. Claude gave the order to increase the tempo. The knight responded immediately, jumping and spinning with a twisting, drill-like motion. Ellie tried to retreat, but the spinning dancer chased her relentlessly, missing by mere inches. From the sidelines, Saren noted the shift in rhythm from adagio to accelerando and warned Claude about a particular note in accelerando known for its destructive potential. As the pace quickened, the instrument knight changed its tune, switching instruments and launching a projectile. The strike hit Ellie, knocking her across the arena and slamming her into one of the beam's structures. She rose, bruised but still able to fight. Then the Eye Knight marked her with a glowing red light. Berter calmly noted that with the heightened tempo came rising heat. The move, called Melting Ray, had a brief duration, but exposure for more than 3 seconds would cook flesh down to the bone. Useu activated Ellie's right leg, allowing her to dodge the ray just in time, leaving no injuries. Another note rang out, a fresh projectile from the instrument knight. Ellie jumped to evade it, but the ballerina refused to relent. It attacked midair with bladed legs. Ellie, with barely a second to react, blocked the strike using the remnants of her broken sword. Useu assessed the situation grimly. At this pace, Ellie would collapse before landing a single decisive blow. They needed a shift, something unexpected. He calculated a variable, a diagonal strike 45 degrees to the ground. Ellie listened. Energy surged into her right arm, and with precise control, she drove her fist into the floor at the instructed angle. The result was immediate. The ground split violently, stone and debris shooting outward as a shockwave rippled across the arena. The surface crumbled beneath her strike, forcing both allies and enemies to react. For a moment, silence followed the destruction. The enemy knights paused, stunned by the sheer raw force of the blow. It wasn't just a breather. It was the first time Ellie truly seized the stage. Useu analyzed the technique's true strength not in sheer destruction, but in precision. The power didn't explode outward. It burrowed deep, warping the battlefield itself. Damaging the knight directly remained a challenge, but reshaping the arena opened new possibilities. Uneven terrain meant interference, especially for those relying on reach and balance. The ballerina knight wandered through the wreckage, searching. Its elegance faltered as it navigated the jagged, broken ground. Ellie struck from cover, but the knight's reflexes still proved too sharp. They clashed again, but this time the floor worked against the ballerina. Each leg extension met stone. Movement lost its flow. Ellie weaved through the rocks like a shadow, narrowing the gap. Just as she closed in, a sudden counterattack sliced off her left hand. Unfazed, she pressed forward, her remaining arm striking true. Caught mid-motion, the ballerina knight reeled. Claude called out for backup, but debris blocked line of sight. The instrument knight's projectiles couldn't find an angle, and the eye knight had no visibility. With space tight and mobility strangled, Ellie pinned the ballerina. Her final strike shattered its core gem, ending the battle. Claude stood frozen, shocked by the knight's fall. Borak watched in awe, newly impressed by Useu's plan. The ballerina knight, drained of life, turned to stone, its body fatting into a dark, brittle husk. The story takes us to a flashback. What is a knight to a necromancer? Some would say it's just a lump of reanimated flesh, an amalgamation of corpses turned into a weapon of war. But for others, it's far more than that. For Claude, his knight was precious. He gently admired it, particularly the precision and beauty of its leg design. To him, Finalov wasn't a monster or a puppet, it was art. It was identity. He called out to it, asking once again to be made the star of the stage. Finalov wasn't merely a creation, it was a second self, a beloved extension of Claude's very soul. Back in the present, Claude let out a scream of horror as he watched Finalov's destruction unfold. Then, as though his world had collapsed, he dropped to his knees and fainted on the stage. Medics rushed over. After examination, it was ruled a temporary shock, non-life-threatening. The match was to continue. With Claude's condition stabilized, his teammates quickly assessed the situation. They realized the opposing team had also lost a major part of their offensive strength. If they could shift the fight to even terrain, they still had a good chance. Berder raised his head, syncing with his knight's vision to survey the field. He spotted Ellie approaching unarmed, relentless, charging straight ahead. He fired his fusion light ray at her, but Ellie didn't confront the blast directly. She used the fallen knight's body as a shield to block the ray and close the gap. After that, she tore a bladed limb from Finalov's remains. She then jumped sideways, avoiding the ray. Mid-motion, she threw the limb she had like a spear at the eye corpse knight. It pierced Berder's knight's eye dead center. Without pause, she ripped off yet another blade and charged toward the instrument knight. The knight responded instantly, launching a signature projectile. Saren, observing the play, commented coldly that pulling the strings didn't signal the start of a performance, it marked its end. The corpse knight pulled back its own strings, forming a massive bow. It released an arrow with incredible force. Ellie had no time to react. The projectile hit and smashed her into debris, but it hadn't pierced through. Useu, still in sync, had shielded Ellie's core with her left arm, softening the blow. With renewed focus, Useu urged Ellie forward. She surged ahead, dodging the follow-up barrage with fluid movements. Closing in, she sliced through one of the knight's massive fingers using Finalov's bladed limb. Saren, quick thinking, first asked if Berder still had energy left. When Berder confirmed that one last burst remained, Saren gave the signal. He would sacrifice his own knight by pinning Ellie down, and Berder would target them both. At Saren's command, the corpse knight hurled itself onto Ellie, locking her in place. At the same moment, Berder's knight activated its rays, targeting both Ellie and the remains of the instrument knight. The beam intensified as the energy surged. The energy output pushed the knight beyond its limits. The light grew unstable, then burst. Berder admitted he'd exceeded his limit. Saren, still composed, complimented the effort. They waited, breath held, unsure if the fight had ended. But then, the remains of the instrument knight split open. Ellie emerged. Tattered but unbroken, she marched forward and struck down Berder's knight with a clean, final blow. The last of the enemy knights fell. Ellie stood tall atop the wreckage, bloodied and victorious. The audience fell into stunned silence. Then the eruption came, cheers roaring through the arena like thunder. The crowd, overwhelmed by what they had witnessed, celebrated the incredible match. Useu stood frozen in disbelief, staring at the ocean of cheers. It was surreal. The applause washed over him like holy water cleansing filth, rinsing away years of scorn and dirt. In that moment, he raised his head and declared his name to the crowd. The name echoed across the arena as the audience began chanting it in unison. Useu, remembering the discrimination, the humiliation, the countless moments of being treated as nothing, shouted his name again. After the match concluded, the mood shifted. Useu was pinning Ira to the wall, screaming, rage pouring out as he accused her of standing by, doing nothing while they risked their lives. While they bled, she played. He grabbed her by the collar, slamming her harder against the wall, demanding any reason that might make sense of her silence before he lost what little restraint he had left. Ira scribbled something in her notebook and showed it to Useu. The note claimed that the cat did not listen to her because its only master was itself. Useu frowned, confused, and asked if she was the one who had created the cat. Yet even then, she insisted that she was not its master, that the creature acted only according to its own will. Frustration twisted Useu's face as he repeated her words back, demanding to know how she could admit to having no control over it. He warned her that no one would believe such nonsense, and if that was the case, why had she joined the War of Corpses in the first place? Ira scribbled again, stating only that the cat had wanted to come. Veins bulged across Useu's forehead as his anger flared. He declared that speaking with her was pointless, yet could not stop himself. His voice hardened with the weight of his resolve. He was fighting with his life on the line, and if her beast caused his knight's death, then both she and the cat would pay with their lives. With that, he stormed away. Elsewhere, Borak stood in a bathroom, gazing at his reflection. Weariness settled into his bones, and the wrinkles on his face seemed deeper than he remembered. At first, he wanted to give up, but the thought of Useu, recklessly forging new paths and refusing defeat, forced him to reconsider. Perhaps that was what reckless youth felt like. Later, Borak set aside what little money he had to prepare for creating a new knight. He calculated grimly. If he ate only once a day, he could stretch it far enough. On his way home, he paused before a street vendor selling skewers. His eyes lingered until he bought some, carrying them back despite his tight budget. At home, he offered them to Dora. She asked why he kept wasting money when they had so little, but Borak admitted he couldn't resist since she loved them. He reassured her that his work on the Annihilation Rush technique was nearly finished. Dora's face brightened as he explained how he had finally gathered enough power, though his design had collapsed under internal pressure. He reflected on how real cockroaches survived force by flattening their bodies and absorbing shock through their joints. His next knight would mimic this, releasing pressure through hidden vents. At first, he considered placing them at the joints, but quickly corrected himself. It would be better to weave them into the exoskeleton seams. The idea filled him with excitement, certain that this time the design would succeed. Dora smiled at him, remarking that though his eyes often looked dull, they lit up whenever he spoke of the War of Corpses, and she found that strangely impressive. Embarrassed, Borak tried to play it off, yet deep down he felt that this attempt was different. If he pulled it off, maybe, just maybe, he could finally earn recognition. His cheeks reddened at the thought, and Dora reassured him warmly that no matter the outcome, she would always be by his side. Back in his lab, Borak stood before his half-constructed knight. For once, confidence swelled within him, yet silence brought doubts, since when had it become so hard even to imagine success? In his dreams, the one who stood on stage and received applause was always someone else, never him. He questioned whether this time was truly different or if he was only fooling himself again. But giving up now would mean those 30 long years had amounted to nothing. He refused to accept that. He swore to himself that this time for sure, he would succeed. Meanwhile, back at Useu's house, Ellie complained about the burns on her scalp. Useu offered to trim her hair, mentioning that he always cut his own. Though skeptical and with no salon to rely on, she reluctantly agreed to let him trim just the ends. He reassured her to trust him as she did in battle. After Useu finished cutting Ellie's hair, she felt confused by what he had done. He claimed he had fixed it and handed her a mirror. The instant Ellie saw her reflection, her eyes widened in surprise. After Useu finished cutting Ellie's hair, she became furious. Her once straight locks looked as though a rat had chewed through them, uneven and ragged. Useu, however, insisted it looked no different than before. Ellie reminded him that her hair had been straight and evenly cut, and she had asked only for a trim, not for it to be hacked away. Determined to fix it, Useu cut it again, this time all at once. But the sides ended up mismatched, and he tried to correct it with more cuts. Eventually, after several attempts, her hair became much shorter than she wanted. Realizing how much had been lost, Ellie's anger flared. She stormed off, telling him to be quiet and disappointed for trusting him. Meanwhile, Useu carefully collected the strands of hair scattered across the floor. The next morning, as Ellie was still resting, she awoke to find Useu hunched over, piecing her cut hair together. She erupted in anger, but he calmly explained that he had found a way to restore it. Using the same organic adhesive necromancers employed when crafting knights, he could reattach the strands one by one. It was still imperfect and a little short, but if he added roughly 1,000 more, it would look whole again. Ellie was stunned to hear how many strands he had worked on through the night and asked if he had really stayed up gluing each one individually. He brushed off her concern, insisting that she should trust him. At first she was speechless, but he went on. They were risking their lives together, and he had made her a promise, one he intended to keep no matter what. Whatever the result, he assured her that her beauty would not be diminished. After hearing this, Ellie allowed him to finish what he had started. This time his work went more smoothly. Meanwhile, in a restaurant elsewhere, customers spoke excitedly about the recent 3-on-1 match. The fighters had been extraordinary, especially for their first time competing. They had even broken through Rhal's defense. Their strength was overwhelming, with punches so powerful they could have shattered ribs in a single hit. Much of the conversation focused on one fighter in particular, a human with striking silver-pink hair. Many assumed this unusual choice of appearance must have been the necromancer's personal preference. Their chatter was interrupted when Naren approached and asked for the necromancer's name. One patron recalled the name, it was Us. Naren thanked them and left, pondering the details. A silver-pink-haired female knight who could crush opponents with a single punch. He wondered if it might be Ileana. But that raised questions. Knights, as he understood, were monsters without memory or will of their own. Why then did this one fight as if she still carried identity? The thought unsettled him. Back then, Ileonora had used the alias Rhal. None of it connected yet, but Naren resolved to seek out the necromancer named us. Lost in thought, he failed to notice where he was going and walked straight into a pole. There were only 9 days left until the next match. Useu pointed out 2 major problems they needed to address. The first was that their techniques needed names. Ellie was surprised, dismissing the idea as unnecessary, recalling fighters who simply shouted attack names like spinning axe. Useu argued that labeling techniques gave them identity. With the right name, people would remember them, perhaps even bestow a title like the Iron Wall of Rhal. Recognition mattered. He even proposed a name for their own signature move, one he believed sounded powerful, though Ellie showed little interest. Undeterred, Useu moved on to the second problem. They had been analyzing their punches from multiple angles, and he admitted that even he would be unable to block them if they landed at close range. If they could connect, they could win, but knights were far beyond human limits with superior speed, agility, and reflexes. Landing a clean hit would not be easy. Ellie agreed with his conclusion. He continued, nodding that until now they had relied on terrain advantages, but such opportunities would no longer be available. What they needed most was a way to close the distance in a single explosive move, a true technique. Ellie thought about it. If they could bridge the gap quickly, they would have the match in hand. She asked if by technique he meant something like the modification of her left arm. Useu confirmed, but clarified that true techniques were far more complex. Her arm's modification was only a beginner's step, barely worthy of the name. A proper technique required completely redesigning biological structures, incorporating materials from rare creatures, or adapting data from elite fighters. The process, he explained, could take months or even years. Ellie was stunned by the time frame. He gave the example of the Claw of Yuna, a technique coveted for its potential. Many had attempted it, but only 2 had ever succeeded, and it had taken 5 years to perfect its calibration. Ellie realized that necromancy was far more complicated than she had thought. Useu added that once a design was complete, it was easy to replicate, hence why necromancers rarely altered a knight's body after its initial creation. Still, they were poor, forced to gamble on high-risk, high-reward materials with low success rates. At last, Useu produced a box, explaining why they had acquired it. Inside the box lay a material that unsettled Ellie. She recoiled, saying it looked creepy. Useu explained that it was the leg of a creature called the Difgust, an insect that lived deep within the Black Mountain. The mountain's core, a slippery pit, stretched downward, filled with methane and hydrogen sulfide. Juveniles dwelled at the bottom, feeding on slimy moss that grew on bacterial colonies. But once they matured, the pressure inside their bodies reached its limit, and their organs began demanding oxygen. To survive and reproduce, they had no choice but to escape the pit. During their juvenile stage, they stored all of their nutrients in their legs, then risked everything on a single, desperate leap to climb out of pits that extended kilometers deep. Ellie grew curious, realizing it was these legs that allowed them to leave their cradle and become adults. Useu confirmed it. Difgust could jump hundreds of meters in one bound, their muscle fibers incredibly dense but notoriously difficult to control. Because of this, their legs were not usually used directly, but instead to reinforce or support a knight's body. They were hard to handle and unpopular, but since supply was stable, they were relatively cheap. Ellie doubted whether such a thing could be designed and calibrated in just a few days. Useu admitted it would be impossible for an ordinary person, but reminded her that he was not ordinary, he was Useu. When she asked why he had not chosen this material from the start, he explained that he had lacked the funds and had been focused on building her. At first, the risk had not been worth it since they could barely walk together. But now this might be the very move that determined victory or defeat. He asked her to trust him, assuring her that his 10 years of experience would finally prove their worth. 5 days later, Useu worked feverishly, sweat dripping as he struggled with Ellie's leg. Nothing was going as expected. He cursed under his breath, thinking he was doomed. Ellie, adding pressure, asked if she could even trust him anymore. Lacking his earlier confidence, he admitted that the muscle fiber arrangements were far different than anticipated. He still did not understand how to utilize the compression fibers, yet he forced himself to breathe, telling himself he could do it. He had to. Ellie, examining her arm, remarked that lately she had begun moving one of her limbs so naturally it felt like her own. Sometimes she didn't even need to look. Useu, jotting notes, confirmed it. He explained that he studied her body every single day, when and how she laughed, the way she walked, even her smallest habits. When she grew angry, her left eyelid twitched. When she was deep in thought, she tapped the floor 3 times with her left heel. When tired, she shrugged her right shoulder, and before falling asleep, she always turned around, sometimes even picking her nose. At that, Ellie flared in anger, calling him insane and cutting him off. But Useu turned back with seriousness. He revealed that he had also been studying the microcurrents of her body, analyzing the tiniest details of her movements to ensure she could act as naturally as possible without conscious effort. If he had not gone that far, he would never have been able to serve as her perfect arm and leg. Surprised, Ellie asked if this was all to win the War of Corpses. He admitted it was, but added that if she needed him to, he would remain by her side until the end. He would be her limbs because they were partners now. His words left her speechless, and she muttered quietly to herself, almost in denial. 4 days later, Useu and his teammates gathered. Borak immediately noticed that Useu's knight looked different and upon closer inspection realized one leg had been made from a disgust. He was stunned. Though crude, it looked plausible. He asked whether Useu had tested it yet. Useu admitted he had only completed it 30 minutes earlier and had tried it just once, but the result had been a success. Borak studied Ellie, then turned to Useu with excitement, declaring that the young necromancer was truly talented. Fired up, Borak shouted that he would not lose. He would show the true power of an old veteran and Useu should look forward to it. Useu simply asked him to do his best. When the second match of the second preliminary round began, Ellie stood ready. Useu reminded her that if they won, they would advance. Ellie remained worried, noting that when they tested the new modification earlier, it seemed unstable. Useu admitted he hadn't had enough time to perfect it, but insisted they just needed to hold out a few rounds. Ellie asked who their opponent would be, wishing it might be the girl named Kaelina. Useu agreed, but thought the odds were low. The announcer called out the teams. Team 1, Useu's group. Team 2, Sabino, Rudin, and Beladir. Useu noticed that all three opponents carried black ranks. He and Borak theorized that such ranks either belonged to unskilled necromancers who couldn't pass the first round or to dangerous newcomers competing for the first time. Ellie studied their knights and found them bizarre. She asked if those creatures could even be considered knights. Useu supposed they were. Their forms were unpredictable, attack and defense patterns erratic, yet their construction looked finely balanced and of high quality. Useu asked Borak to go first. Borak agreed, determined to show him something impressive. When the signal came, Borak charged forward with excitement, unleashing Annihilation Dash. His cockroach knight flared red, surging with energy. Across the arena, the opposing necromancer smiled. Borak declared that this time would be different. He could feel the power boiling within him, certain he would unleash the true Annihilation Rush. But before his cockroach knight could even begin, a bullet-like projectile obliterated it. The opponent's ball-shaped knight had transformed into a cannon, launching deadly shots. The necromancer on the other side laughed, boasting that he had already eliminated the highest rank one. Now the next challenger was Ellie. Ellie prepared herself. Useu directed her to rely on her new leg strength, allowing her to leap and dodge the incoming projectile fired by the opponent. After dodging, she asked for another opportunity, and Useu instructed her to prepare her fist as well. She focused her energy into her arm, which turned red as the opponent's knight finished preparing its next projectile. Ellie then leaped straight toward it. Useu compared the forward movement to gazing at a single faint dot in the depths of endless darkness, as though that distant glimmer was the only guide ahead. Each step felt like carrying the weight of countless anxieties and unseen trials on his back, yet he pushed forward, forcing unwilling feet to move again and again into the unknown. Despite this, he refused to give up. This, he believed, was his lunging will toward his goal, and he decided to call the technique One Strike. Ellie's attack connected with the opponent's knight, shattering it into pieces. Useu warned her to remain cautious, as two opponents still remain. And suddenly, Useu began to glitch. Ellie demanded to know what he was doing, insisting the opponent was approaching and urging him to kill. Useu agreed, repeating her belief that killing the enemy would secure their victory. His face continued to glitch, and yellow glowing marks appeared inside his eyes. Borak called out to him, urging him to snap out of it. The one Useu was targeting was not an enemy, it was his own teammate. Ellie was now on top of Ira's corpse knight, her sword arm forced downward in an attempt to stab him. Borak waved his hand in front of Useu, trying to break the illusion, but it was useless. Direct contact between players was forbidden during the match. The moment the battle began, the circular knight of the opponent had opened and released something strange. Immediately afterward, Useu had lost control and begun attacking his own ally. It was a mind erosion type knight, but unlike usual cases that required activation conditions, this one directly penetrated the mind. The necromancer opponent proved to be highly skilled. Ellie struggled to stop the arm that Useu controlled. She insisted she disliked the cat, but killing it would be madness. She urged him to break free, yet the strength of his arm movements surpassed her expectations, making it nearly impossible to stop. She considered breaking her own arm, but knew doing so would put them at a severe disadvantage. She found herself uncertain of what to do. Borak analyzed the technique. Even mind erosion knights could not maintain complex mental control. Forcing Useu to perceive all allies as enemies and attack them must be the limit of its abilities. Borak thought if he could destroy the caster, the control would break, but he was already too overwhelmed just trying to evade the two remaining opponents. He contemplated using Annihilation Rush, but if it failed, their situation would become hopeless. He told Ira there was no other way and urged retreat before it was too late. Ira, however, was still forming hand signs. At that moment, Ellie's arm forced its way toward the opponent. Useu, still under control, declared victory as the cat knight's head was severed. The severed head of the cat knight rolled and skipped away. Though the head was completely detached, the cat began to transform into a gooey shadow, reforming its head once more. As soon as the head took shape, the cat fixed its gaze on Ellie. Ellie insisted to herself that it had not been intentional, but the cat devoured her entirely, engulfing her within its body. She felt an ominous presence as she was swallowed by the darkness, but soon the cat expelled her, releasing her outside again. She was sweating, startled by the experience. The cat charged forward, rushing toward the mind-eroding knight. Seeing this, the necromancer ordered protection for himself, as the knight could not act while sustaining its mind control technique. One opponent rushed to defend the mind-eroding knight, while the other moved to pursue the cockroach knight. As the opponent knight attempted to strike the cat leapt away, dodging with speed far beyond expectation. The necromancer of the mind-eroding knight began to doubt his comrade's usefulness, then turned his focus back to Useu and released the mind erosion technique. Borak noticed that Useu had regained his senses. He reminded him that he had just been attacking his own teammate and explained that their opponent's knight was of the mind erosion type. Realizing this, Useu understood that all he had just experienced was an illusion. He had not noticed it at all. As he expected, they were not simple opponents, but he swore he would not fall under mind control again. He instructed Ellie to prepare herself. Ellie, relieved, felt happiness upon hearing his voice for the first time in this battle. The necromancer shifted his target and directed the mind erosion technique toward Ira. At the same time, as the cat knight closed in on the mind-eroding knight, the crow knight interfered, pushing the cat away. The masked necromancer claimed the cat as his responsibility, while another asked about the cockroach knight. The response came: the cockroach had suddenly exploded and died. Borak was devastated. He could not understand why it had failed again. He had believed everything was perfect, yet once more the attempt had collapsed. He poured everything he had into it, but it was still a failure. He was consumed with disappointment, while Useu remained silent. The crow knight seized the cat and lifted it into the air. On command, the crow began tearing the cat apart, driving its beak into the body and ripping it to pieces. Meanwhile, the mind erosion technique was explained to be one that induced a frenzy state, making the opponent perceive everything around them as an enemy and compelling attacks in every direction. The advantage of this technique was strongest when the enemy knights were close together, but it became inefficient when battles grew tangled, as they had now. The necromancer decided it was time to change tactics. His knight began to transform, tearing itself apart until a humanoid knight with butterfly wings emerged from the remains. At that moment, Ellie and Useu combined their speed, dashing instantly toward the newly emerged knight. Together, they unleashed one strike. The opponent was astonished but reacted quickly, deploying a triangular shield. Yet even that defense could not withstand the destructive force of one strike. The new knight was obliterated before it could reveal any abilities. The necromancer was left in shock. He turned and began to descend from the podium. The masked necromancer called for him to return, insisting the match was not over. He reminded him they were close to victory and urged him to come back and at least provide instructions. Rudin, however, asked if in their eyes those knights resembled the work of ordinary necromancers. He declared the round lost and told them to prepare for the next. He admitted that encountering such opponents was fortunate, for it meant that next time they would secure victory. The masked necromancer took offense at Rudin's words. He accused Rudin of always looking down on others, reminding him that he had been the first to fall. He vowed to prove Rudin wrong and himself right. At that moment, the crow knight tore the cat knight completely in half. The cat was torn in half, but it did not die. It targeted the crow knight and leapt upward, landing swiftly on top of its head. The masked necromancer could not understand what the cat intended with only half its body remaining, but it latched tightly onto the crow's head, forcing the bird to crash against the ground. The crow struggled, yet the cat wrapped itself firmly around its head, and little by little it began to swallow the crow whole. Useu watched as the cat devoured the crow entirely, leaving nothing behind. Once finished, the cat began to transform again. This time, new body parts emerged, sprouting legs and wings similar to those of the crow it had consumed. Even Ira's own teammates were shocked at the sight. The opposing necromancers could not believe it, calling it impossible. Those wings and legs were unmistakably the crow knight. Confusion spread among them as they speculated whether the cat could imitate other knights by consuming them. None had ever heard of such a possibility, and it defied biological logic. Useu was equally taken aback. The bizarre movements and unpredictable strategy were unlike anything he had seen before. More than that, the cat restored the size of its damaged body in proportion to what it devoured. This meant it could redesign and reconstruct itself mid-battle. Useu could not even identify what kind of material it was made from. Questions rose within him. Who exactly was Ira? The masked man, concerned, turned to his comrade. Though the battle was 2 against 1, he claimed to have deciphered all the opponent's moves and asked if his ally could turn the situation around. He encouraged him, acknowledging that no one else could achieve it. He admitted without saying aloud that this comrade was the strongest among them. Sabino accepted the praise, admitting he had been discovered. He believed strength was something that could not be hidden, no matter how hard one tried. He confessed he had been saving his ultimate technique for the finals, but circumstances left him no choice but to unleash it now. Positioning his knight, he warned that they would tremble before the true monster he had created. The knight rose onto 2 feet and activated its ultimate technique. In the next instant, it was cut cleanly in two and fell lifeless to the ground. Ellie had defeated the monster with a single swift attack. The opponents were crushed with disappointment as the audience erupted in chants of Useu's name, praising him as the best, declaring his coolness once again. Useu basked in the acclaim, feeling as though all his burdens had been washed away by the adoration. They had secured another victory, growing stronger and more synchronized each time. Still, their opponents had proven formidable, especially Rudin, who had wielded mind erosion freely and even attempted to change tactics through molting. He was both creative and skilled. To win the championship, they knew they would have to face him again, and preparation was essential. Useu noticed Ellie had been quiet and asked if something was troubling her. After a pause, she inquired about necromancy, specifically the principle that allowed a corpse to move as though alive. She wanted to know what kind of technical or magical mechanism made it possible. Useu explained that while many studies existed on its methods and rules, the underlying principle of necromancy remained a mystery. She compared it to knowing when the sun rose and set without understanding the mechanisms that made it possible. He agreed with that description but asked why she wanted to know. She then reminded him of how strange the cat had been earlier. He admitted it was strange indeed, especially since it was a type of knight he had never seen before. To think it could imitate another knight simply by consuming it, and in doing so grow stronger as long as it survived, was remarkable. After a moment of silence, she pressed further, asking about her own case. Knights were said to be mindless masses of corpses, yet she still retained her memories and the ability to speak. She wondered how such a situation was possible and what the chances were of someone else experiencing the same. Useu thought carefully, then admitted he had never heard of such a case. He asked why she was curious now. She revealed that when she had been swallowed by the cat, a strange substance scanned her body thoroughly, compressing her cells as though attempting to break them down one by one. During that process, she heard a whispering voice from deep within the cat's body, endlessly asking whether it should consume her or not. Useu denied the possibility. To him, she must have been influenced by mind control. It was not a knight capable of such abilities. She speculated that perhaps, like her, it could be another unique case. At that moment, a knock came at the door. Useu was confused. No one should have been coming there at that time. He asked who it was, but no answer came. The knocking repeated. Useu approached the door, opening it while reminding that no one was allowed to enter the player's waiting room without permission. To his shock, Ira was standing at the door. She remained silent, while Useu stood frozen in surprise. Useu told Ira that the match was over and asked why she had come to his room at that moment. Ellie quickly put on her mask. Useu suspected that Ira had considered the match too dangerous and planned to have her cat devour them now. He looked for the cat and sensed a presence behind the door, thinking the cat must be there, but Borak popped out and shoved both Ira and Useu into the room. Borak then addressed them, praising Useu as the crazy rising new god of necromancy and acknowledging Ira's crazy cat that ate other knights. He credited them with helping him pass the second preliminary round and suggested it looked like he might make the main tournament this time. With an enthusiastic tone, he said this year felt different more than ever, and that he had a feeling they could succeed. Useu asked why Borak had come along. Borak answered by asking what he meant, saying that comrades, even for a short while, should at least celebrate. When asked if Ira agreed, Borak said he did not know because she would not say anything when asked, yet he claimed she was secretly looking forward to it. Ira remained nonchalant and silent as always. The cat meowed at the door while Useu stayed on his toes. After a moment, Useu, wearing a party hat, told them that they would have to fight each other in the end anyway and that this kind of thing was meaningless. Borak agreed it was true, but insisted that fighting together earlier had been pretty fun. Useu listened as Borak continued, saying it had been a long time since he had done something with others and maybe that was why he found it so enjoyable. During his time in the War of Corpses, there had never been a single time he had fun, yet being next to young geniuses like them made him feel energized and as if he had grown younger. For some reason, he felt he could really do it this time. Borak, excited, declared that this time was the real deal and that this year would be the year he became champion and gained recognition from everyone. Useu disagreed, asserting that the championship was his. Hearing this, Borak offered a celebratory drink for the prospective champion. Useu accepted the drink while insisting there was no fun in it. Some time passed and Useu grew fully drunk. He was out of it, dancing with his clothes messed up. He and Borak danced like crazy people while Ira played some kind of Jenga ripoff and failed, though the celebration continued. It appeared that only Ira could hold her liquor. She remained sober after 18 glasses, while Useu was drunk after 1 glass, which was impressive. After some bickering and play, Useu lay on the ground while Borak and Ira sat. Borak asked whether Useu had really grown up eating trash in a junkyard. Drunk and spilling his history, Useu admitted he had spent his entire life eating scraps others threw away, being ignored and called a piece of trash. He then rose excitedly and declared that no matter how one is born or raised, the only person who can decide what kind of person one becomes is oneself. Borak thought he had heard that before and asked who had said it. Useu replied that it was Raphael. The camera cut to Ira suspiciously, as if she were Raphael's daughter. Useu said Raphael was the greatest necromancer and swore he would become like him. Continuing the earlier theory, her hair color matching his was just more evidence. After all, in anime and manga, identical hair shades are basically DNA tests. Ira then scribbled in her notebook. It read that if he wanted to become like Raphael. Useu told her that if that was not obvious, Raphael was the idol of all necromancers. She then asked if he knew what had happened to Raphael. Useu became confused. Borak remembered that it had been a while since anyone had heard about Raphael. Borak guessed Raphael must have earned a ton of money and was probably living well and eating nicely. Useu screamed that Raphael was an incredible person. Ira scribbled furiously and then suddenly stopped. Ellie, standing behind Ira, noticed that Ira's face had swollen with veins to the point that her facial structure had changed. Ellie was surprised. Elsewhere, someone ran on a treadmill for 15 minutes and 13 seconds before falling. After a short while, the running man fell again. They called him the CEO, and his total running time was 9 hours, 15 minutes, and 16 seconds, 3 seconds longer than last week. He was pleased, claiming he had become a better person than the previous week, though others worried that if he kept pushing his limits like this, he could actually die. The CEO preferred death to not becoming a better person than before. This CEO was the one who had grown the War of Corpses, which had been in decline, into the world's top entertainment. He was competent and cool-headed yet secretive, with everything wrapped in a veil. His age, birth, and even his name remained unrevealed. He was like a shadow beneath a long-brimmed hat, a shadow-like man of the War of Corpses who definitely existed but could not be felt. What he sought to gain from this fight remained unclear. The CEO asked about the validity of the information. His subordinates confirmed it was a summary of the noteworthy contestants in the tournament. He thought it was absolutely wonderful and believed this would be the most interesting tournament of all time. During the final preparations for the preliminaries, the subordinates showed him the final stages and he approved them. He then stated that fighting with readiness to die if they did so, the world would remember their victory for eternity. The total number of contestants who had passed to the third and final preliminary round was 2,502, excluding previous champions. The rules for the preliminary rounds changed every time, making preparation difficult. The best approach was to maximize mobility and endurance. However, Useu realized they were now facing a critical problem. At that moment, Ellie moved with tremendous speed but crashed face first onto the ground. Her leg had broken again. The previous one had lasted 7 uses, but this time it broke after 4 as expected. Creating legs out of defus was not easy, but thanks to their experiments, Useu knew exactly which parts needed improvement. They tried again, it worked 6 times, and also for the 7th attempt, setting a new record. On the 8th attempt, however, it exploded and tore apart. Ellie was heading straight for a rock, bracing herself for impact, but Useu intervened, placing his body between her and the rock. He checked if she was hurt anywhere. Ellie noticed that Useu's shoulder was broken, but he explained it was just a dislocation that he could fix. This had happened a few times before. Ellie argued that a dislocation was serious, but Useu, with an unhinged attitude, made it clear that at that moment she was the most precious thing to him, and as long as she was safe, something like this did not matter. Hearing this, Ellie blushed and her face turned red. Useu then noted that her body felt a bit hot and asked if she was alright. She told him to shut up and not to worry about her. Back at Useu's house, he explained that after a defust risked its life to escape the hole it had grown up in, it immediately detached its extremely energy-consuming and inefficient hind legs. Ellie understood that the legs were used only once in their lifetime before being discarded. Useu confirmed that this explained their inherently low durability. Based on their experiments, the legs could safely withstand up to 3 uses, but any use beyond that, regardless of previous successful uses, caused them to break at random. Ellie realized that the legs could fail unpredictably, yet they were too effective to discard. Useu agreed, emphasizing that they had to try to finish the match within 3 jumps. Ellie then asked about the rules for the final preliminary round the next day. Useu did not know because the rules were a complete mystery. There was only one restriction. The knights had to be reduced to 5 meters or less. Ellie noted that there had been no regulations on knight size until now and guessed that they were going to fight in a narrow space. At the final preliminary stage, a massive red door stood before thousands of contestants all gathered together. Useu wondered if the final preliminary round would be a team battle, and more importantly, what lay behind the giant gate. He was sure that the key to the match lay beyond that gate. An announcement instructed contestants to leave their knights as they were and slowly follow the guide outside. Useu told Ellie that he would return and asked her to wait for him. Being alone in a crowded palace felt suffocating to Useu. Up until now, he had always been with Ellie, but now he began hearing taunting voices echoing in his mind, calling him pathetic, disgusting, and worthless. The darkness seemed to close in and he began to break down. He tried to communicate with Ellie, but he was out of range. The insults grew louder and he struggled to breathe. As he choked, someone grabbed him by the shoulders. It was Borak. Borak helped Useu recover from the mental attack and reminded him that it was time to share the glorious moment before advancing to the main tournament. Once settled, Borak asked what arrangements had been made for the final preliminary round. Useu guessed that the organizers were preparing for some kind of team battle. After filing out the required proposal information and agreeing to the indicated rules, the contestants put on magical devices on their arms. The left arm device displayed the remaining distance and current rank, while the right arm device ensured their safety. The CEO explained that the right arm device was a single-use teleportation tool, intended for emergencies or forfeits. Once the match ended, it would teleport them to a prepared safe area outside. The devices were necessary because the location of the match was extremely enclosed and dangerous. The CEO then pointed to the massive red gate, introducing the battlefield where the final preliminary round would take place. Behind the gate was a 9,999-meter-long massive living organism, described as the personification of hell. The gate opened to reveal a giant southern entrance with its throat fully laid out, resembling the intestines of hell. The only condition to pass the final round was to reach the finish line at the end of the hellish intestines. The final preliminary round had an unprecedented set of rules. The first 1,000 contestants to reach the finish line at the end of the hellish intestines would pass. While acts of harming another contestant with a knight or leaving the arena would result in disqualification, it is judged as lacking the will to continue. Inside the intestines, numerous eye-shaped magical communication devices had been installed to monitor the contestants' progress and broadcast it to the outside. The match was scheduled to begin in exactly 1 minute, and the announcer advised everyone to prepare for the race that would unfold in the living hell. No one had ever witnessed a preliminary round like this. Useu was disturbed by the CEO's warning that only the first 1,000 would return, meaning that anyone who failed would be lost within the collapsing intestines. Ellie added that the intestines would collapse and the knights would be disposed of, making it clear that failing to reach the top 1,000 meant certain death. Despite the danger, Ellie found the concept of a race where her life was at stake interesting. Borak urged Useu to ride his cockroach, suggesting that even without using his annihilation rush, the mount would still be faster than a knight running alone. Since Useu's assistance had already helped Borak pass the second preliminary round, he would now do the same for them. Useu warned Borak not to go back on his word. Contestants prepared for the start, and finally the announcer signaled the beginning of the final preliminary round. Everyone surged toward the entrance, rushing into the intestines. Borak's cockroach moved swiftly, easily outpacing Ellie's running speed. Borak admitted that he hadn't excelled during fights, but in situations like this he would demonstrate the true skill of a veteran. To put him on the spot, many knights began to pass him. Useu commented on calling Borak the effort king, wondering when he would actually show it. Borak kept silent. They finally made it to the gate. They were currently at 873. The entrance was crowded, but starting at that position was not bad. They ran as fast as they could, knowing that all that mattered was making it into the top 1,000. The walls of the intestines began to move as if alive, their scale enormous. Tongue-like structures broke apart, creating cliffs that Useu and Borak fell down, sliding rapidly through the nearly vertical passage. A mouth-shaped magical communicator informed them that this was the esophagus of hell and warned about special obstacles installed midway to hinder movement. If caught, the obstacles would immobilize contestants for 10 minutes. A whip-like tentacle shot toward Useu, and Ellie quickly slashed it, saving him. Useu resolved that he would stick to her. Being alone meant certain failure. They slid down together, with Ellie expertly dodging and destroying obstacles. One appeared directly in front of her, and she cut it in half. Another came up ahead that she could not block, so she pushed Useu away to break through, and they continued sliding. Their hands briefly touched, and Ellie, with precise movements while holding Useu, avoided the next obstacle entirely. Finally, they landed on solid ground after descending about 800 meters, their current rank at 911. Borak and the cockroach were still falling behind, delayed by the crowded passage. Once they landed, they mounted the cockroach and raced toward the finish line. Useu asked if the cockroach had wings or could fly, but Borak reminded him that he hadn't perfected his annihilation rush yet, so no, it could not fly. At that moment, someone called out to Useu. It was Woong, the frog-bomb necromancer and Useu's first fan. Woong expressed his excitement at meeting Useu and explained that he had been cheering for him the entire time. To show his support, Woong had transformed his knight into a massive, intricately designed version of Useu's face. Useu and Borak were both stunned and terrified by the sight of the enormous face looming ahead on the battlefield. Borak and Useu continued running, trying to put distance between themselves and Woong, but the frog-bomb necromancer followed closely, insisting that Useu stop running and properly admire the giant face he had crafted. Borak and Useu increased their speed, eventually losing him. Borak remarked that the creation was a horrifying monster like something straight out of hell, but Useu was annoyed at his comment, insisting that calling his face horrible was offensive. After a moment, Useu conceded that the face was indeed ugly, admitting that even he did not like looking at it. Borak, concerned, asked why Useu seemed to hate himself so much. At that exact moment, Woong and his giant knight, Useu 2.0, leapt in again. Woong proudly announced the creation of a beautiful face, showing Useu 2.0 shooting its tongue out. However, Useu 2.0 rolled off balance due to the enormous head and slammed into the wall ahead. The walls themselves were strange and full of holes of various sizes and shapes. Useu, Borak, and Ellie quickly deliberated which path to take, but with little time to waste and their ranks slipping, they decided to simply follow the most ordinary-looking hole. At that moment, their rank had fallen to 977. Outside the intestines, the race was being broadcast using the magical eye devices, and commentators excitedly covered the event. The officer beside the CEO reported that the response to the match had been excellent, with rookie contestants gaining exposure and audience interaction reaching the target numbers. However, the officer also expressed concern that the race relied too heavily on luck, leaving the tournament vulnerable to media criticism. The CEO asked the officer if he believed he had reached his position solely through his efforts. The officer explained that while he might not be the absolute best, he always did his best, which had brought him to that seat. The CEO nodded, satisfied, but remarked that his own position had depended heavily on luck. The officer acknowledged that the CEO had lived diligently, but the CEO continued, explaining that he had been fortunate to avoid fatal disease, to be born in an era where his talent could be utilized, to meet people who recognized him, and to have parents who nurtured him. In short, his success was largely due to luck. Despite that, he wanted to see whether desperation could overcome fate, whether a person who had risen through luck could withstand a catastrophic misfortune. He believed the tournament would be a stage to display this human greatness, and the audience would revel in the spectacle. Back in the intestines, the passage was narrowing. Useu feared it might be blocked, forcing them to backtrack, but Borak refused, insisting that turning back now would mean failure. They had come too far. Ahead, a necromancer knight blocked the passage. The necromancer advised Useu and his team to go back and find another route. Useu refused, reasoning that having traveled 700 meters already, backtracking would be twice the loss and the risk of disqualification would increase. The necromancer protested, citing money invested in the fact that this was their last chance, but Useu remained resolute, placing his life above all else. The necromancer reminded him of the match rules, emphasizing that contestants must not intentionally harm others using their knights, though fighting among knights was allowed. She attacked with her knight's tentacle, nearly striking Borak's cockroach. She reasoned that if they were disqualified for lacking a knight, they would be teleported outside, so they had to act fast. A sudden flash of light marked Ellie's intervention. She dashed in and swiftly cut apart the necromancer's knight. The necromancer was then teleported out of the arena. Useu checked with Borak. There were a few legs cut off on their side, but they could still move. They hurried forward, now aware that fighting among knights was allowed, introducing a whole new set of variables into the race. Finally, they spotted the exit. Only 7,800 meters remained. Useu hoped the next section would provide some advantage, but as he scanned the area, his eyes caught something noteworthy.
Useu saw something strange appear in front of him. He froze, his attention caught by a distant yellow shimmer. It was a vast, liquid body. Borak wondered what this place was. Borak realized everyone was swimming and questioned if this was a swimming section. Useu observed the other competitors very closely. All the competitors were rushing through the liquid. Useu felt they were being chased. Borak worried about their low rank. Desperate not to fall behind, Borak asked Useu if he could swim. Useu admitted he had never swum, but figured it would work out. Borak yelled for them to go, and they both jumped into the liquid. They all screamed as they fell uncontrollably. Useu plunged deep into the strange yellow liquid. He gasped for air, his head finally breaking the surface. He realized he couldn't swim, thrashing wildly to stay afloat. Ellie quickly grabbed him, scolding him for not asking for help sooner. Ellie told him to hold her arm tightly, making Useu flustered. She then instructed him to copy the movement of her leg. Ellie explained this was a much more efficient way to swim together. Working in sync, they finally began to make their way through the water. As they moved, Useu started to notice the feeling of the liquid. He became lost in thought, pondering the strange sensation on his skin. The water felt warm, making him think about the mother he never knew. He wondered aloud if this cozy feeling was like a mother's embrace. Ellie listened carefully to his surprisingly vulnerable words. She simply told him that he was saying some funny things. Borak then swam over, apologizing that he couldn't help because of his legs. Useu reassured him, and Borak noted the chamber's immense size. Borak mentioned that being able to fly would be a huge advantage. Suddenly, he felt something unexpected latch onto his leg from below. He quickly dunked his head under the water to investigate the cause. To his horror, a monstrous creature was latched onto his leg. Borak let out a terrified scream, completely shocked by the sudden attack. A voice suddenly announced this was the stomach of hell, a simulated organ. The voice warned of parasitic mermaids in the water that cling to people's feet. As a mermaid latched onto Borak, he desperately tried to kick it off. They only obstruct movement, but Borak still struggled fiercely to break free. With a final, furious kick, Borak finally managed to shake the creature loose. He was free from the parasite, but his relief was short-lived. Suddenly, a massive swarm of parasites appeared and began chasing after them. Useu screamed for them to run, but Borak saw only endless water. Desperate for an escape route, Useu frantically scanned their surroundings. He spotted mountain-like structures with people on them, realizing it was a safe zone. Spurred by Useu's urging, they swam frantically towards their only hope of survival. But the relentless swarm of parasites was closing in fast right behind them. They pushed themselves to their limits, desperately trying to outpace the creatures. It wasn't enough. The parasites caught up and immediately began to attack. One of the creatures latched onto Ellie's neck, a truly horrifying sight. Ellie powerfully launched herself from the water onto a solid surface, escaping the danger. Borak also made it to safety, but a parasite was stuck to his leg. Useu quickly kicked the parasite off, angrily questioning Borak's recklessness. He warned that one mistake could kill them, leaving Borak to despair over swimming. Useu scanned the area, his eyes landing on the distant exit. Realizing it was a kilometer away, Useu knew swimming while fighting would take hours. Borak cursed as he saw their rank had fallen out of the top 1,000. Feeling the pressure of falling behind, Useu desperately wondered what to do next. He considered leaping across the giant teeth, but decided it was far too dangerous. His gaze fell on other contestants, and he considered using them as bait. But that would require fighting, making enemies, and the bait wouldn't last long. With no good options, a wave of anxiety washed over Useu. His frustration grew as he realized their rank just kept on dropping. He feared they were falling to the bottom with the rest of the trash. A monstrous voice from his dreams mocked him, questioning his capabilities. The taunts filled Useu with a deep sense of anger and frustration. As his rage intensified, a furious red glow emanated from his eyes. Suddenly, an unknown voice broke his thoughts, remarking how easy this was. A necromancer flew by on a bat, mocking the foolish people below. Useu instantly recognized her as the red-headed woman who was with Kalina. Useu carefully considered his next move. The woman celebrated her luck, believing she would now live a good life. Suddenly, something slammed hard against her flying bat, shocking her. It was Ellie who landed on the bat, enraging the woman. Useu reminded her that night fights are allowed, warning her against disqualification. Ellie then grabbed the bat's eye, causing the woman to scream in protest. Useu immediately commanded her to carry them both to the exit. She argued the bat couldn't fly, but Useu had nothing to lose. To prove it, Ellie squeezed the bat's eye, causing her to scream. Faced with this threat, the red-headed woman hesitated. Finally, she agreed to his demand, but presented a condition of her own. Useu was baffled, thinking she had no power to negotiate. She insisted that he must also follow her condition to escape. Her mysterious condition left Useu completely confused. Useu demanded to know what her mysterious condition was. She pointed, stating she could only take him, and that was final. The bats can only handle 200 kilos, could barely handle all 3 of them together. Unable to carry more, she urged him to hurry and get on alone. Hearing this, Borak cried out, terrified of being abandoned. He pleaded, knowing fighting the fish meant certain disqualification. He insisted he was old, weak, and his knight couldn't even fly. But Useu remained completely silent, offering no reassurance. Screaming desperately, he begged Useu to take him along. The red-headed girl cut in, stating the impossible couldn't be done. Again, Useu said nothing, his silence weighing heavily on Borak. Borak then made a grim suggestion, just take his knight's torso. He simply begged, his voice filled with utter desperation. Grabbing onto Useu, he repeated his desperate plea for help. Crying, he pleaded not to let his 30 years of effort be wasted. Still, Useu gave no response, his expression unreadable. Finally, Useu pulled his cape free, offering a single word of apology. He then called to his knight, ready to jump across and leave Borak behind. Borak could only watch, frozen by the devastating realization of being abandoned. Leaving Borak behind, Useu now flew on a bat with the red-headed girl. She turned to look at him, sensing his mood. She asked why he was unhappy, wondering if he was worried about the old man. She told him not to worry, everyone would eventually become enemies anyway. Useu told her to shut up, saying he didn't trust her. She feigned being scared before he asked about Kalina's whereabouts. The girl claimed that despite knowing Kalina for a long time, they weren't close. She only associated with people like Kalina when there was something to gain. Useu realized she was like a bat, sticking to whoever was advantageous. She told him not to be mad since he was getting her help now. Besides, she cheekily added, he was now with a cute girl like her. Useu bluntly told her to stop the nonsense and focus on what's ahead. Ignoring the tension, they continued their flight through the sky. Useu checked their rank, noticing they were back in the top 1,000. He figured many other necromancers must have been held up in this section, but just then his eyes shot downwards as he sensed danger. An attack surged from below and he yelled out a warning. A monstrous hook shot up, grabbing the wing of their bat. The arm yanked them violently downwards, sending them into a freefall. Useu realized a knight on the ground was dragging them from the sky. The necromancer demanded they fly and carry him while he was still nice. The redhead found this familiar, but Useu said the bat was overloaded. The necromancer pulled harder, suggesting it would be fine without Useu. Suddenly, Ellie leaped from the bat, charging directly at the enemy. a corpse knight immediately moved to attack her. She instantly jumped, effortlessly dodging the knight's attack. With a swift motion, she cut the knight down. She continued her relentless and overwhelming attack. She delivered the final blow with a powerful slash. His knight destroyed. One shocked necromancer was forcibly teleported away. Impressed, the other necromancer decided to fight seriously. His corpse knight began to contract and change form. Multiple sharp arm hooks launched out from its body. Useu immediately commanded Ellie to use her leaps ability. Power coursed through Ellie's leg, glowing with blue energy. Moving with incredible speed, she dodged every single hook. In an instant, she appeared before the corpse knight. Without hesitation, she plunged her blade into the knight's core. The knight turned to stone as the necromancer pleaded for another chance. As he begged for one last chance, the necromancer was teleported away. Useu remarked that his opponent should have chosen his fights more carefully. Turning to the red-headed girl, he offered his hand, checking if she was hurt and urging her on. The red-haired girl was visibly startled by his unexpected gesture. She hesitantly confirmed she was fine and took his offered hand. With that settled, the two of them continued flying through the area. After finally passing the water area, she excitedly announced their arrival. Useu let the past go. She then praised his incredible strength. She introduced herself as Nia and sincerely asked Useu to be friends. Useu listened to her friendly offer with a neutral expression. He seemed indifferent, telling her that she could do as she pleased. Nia tapped him, inviting him to a meal after the preliminaries. At that exact moment, Ellie suddenly reached out and grabbed Nia's hand. Completely confused, Nia wondered why Ellie was suddenly holding her arm. Useu stealthily whispered to Ellie, questioning her sudden action. He warned her to let go, fearing they could both be disqualified. The red-haired girl suddenly went completely silent. Ellie just stared back at the quiet girl. She remained unresponsive, not saying a single word. Useu wondered about her sudden actions, fearing disqualification. He then noticed the eyes on the wall, watching them. The strange eyes on the wall were observing them very closely. Useu apologized, explaining his arm moved on its own due to bad memories. He lifted his hand from her hair, asking if she was hurt anywhere. She said she was fine, noting his unique, human-like knight materials. She marveled at how alive the knight's eyes looked, asking about the emotion. She wondered if it was anger or confusion, but quickly dismissed those ideas. She then landed on a different emotion, asking if it could be jealousy. Suddenly, other contestants began to rush past them, startling her. Useu sprinted off, saying there was no time. She quickly decided to follow him. As they ran, Useu asked why her intentions felt different than usual. Ellie bluntly admitted that she just did not like the other girl. He questioned her reason, but she urged him not to meet the girl. Useu admitted he would do anything necessary if it meant they could win. Hearing his unwavering resolve, Ellie glanced over at him with a troubled look. She simply told him that she did not like that idea at all. Suddenly, a huge gust of wind slammed into the red-headed girl. The red-haired girl struggled, desperately holding onto a tentacle against the powerful wind. An announcement revealed they had entered the relentless winds of Hell's lungs. In this treacherous area, strange germs immediately began attacking the contestants. The announcer revealed these were the notorious germs of Hell. The announcer wished them luck as the redhead struggled forward. She felt the wind was too strong, her grip weakening. In that critical moment, her hand finally slipped from its hold. But before she was blown away, Useu suddenly grabbed her hand. Useu pulled her closer, helping her stay on the path. The redhead was shocked, questioning why her rival was helping her. He offered to block the wind, telling her to focus on controlling her knight. She admitted it was much better, but worried about the strain on him. He brushed off her concern, saying she was light and he was strong enough. Touching his chest, she was surprised, remarking on how sturdy he felt. He realized her ability to fly was invaluable for them to survive this place. Crossing the windy area, he knew keeping her with them was a huge advantage. The redhead found herself blushing, clearly flustered by their close contact. From a close distance, Ellie was watching, and at that moment, a germ flew toward Ellie, and she quickly snatched it from the air. She then crushed it in her bare hand, her expression showing extreme irritation. With that, they continued moving through the treacherous area together. Reaching the end, Useu wondered if this was it, but as they emerged, they were both utterly stunned by the next challenge. They saw other contestants climbing what appeared to be a gigantic spine. An announcer's voice declared this was the final section, the spine of hell. The goal was to climb the endless vertebrae to pass through the exit. The announcer then explained what would happen if any of them were to fall. Fortunately, a soft cushion called the Hellcat's Paw was installed below. The announcer encouraged everyone, noting they could always climb again with enough stamina. While Useu remained silent, the red-headed girl called this section a piece of cake. She summoned her bat knight, and Useu thought it was worth bringing her along. With a powerful flap of its wings, the bat prepared to ascend. The creature swiftly carried both of them high into the air. Useu checked the fluctuating rankings, feeling secure in their current position. He believed they would easily pass since there wasn't much distance left to fly. But just at that moment, something unexpected below caught his eye. To his surprise, it was Kalina, steadily climbing the tower by hand. Kalina spotted Useu, her expression immediately souring with annoyance. She couldn't believe it, wondering how he was still in the competition. She ordered her necromancer to kill him, but he worried about the schedule. Kalina didn't care about elimination, she just wanted Useu to fail. She was obsessed with the idea that he must remain beneath her. To convince him, she offered a tenfold reward for Useu's elimination. The necromancer called to Nia, but she refused to join them. She believed sticking with Useu was actually the more advantageous move. Annoyed, the necromancer dismissed her, confident his bats were fast enough. The necromancer cast his spell, unleashing a dark, blinding mist. Black ink exploded from his knight, and Nia gasped in surprise. He explained the ink block's vision, ordering Kalina to attack now. But just then, Ellie dashed forward, tearing right through the ink. The necromancer was completely stunned by her unexpected move. Without hesitation, Ellie slashed the necromancer's knight, cutting it completely in half. The necromancer was confused, wondering how his knight was being controlled without sight. He couldn't understand it. Believing he had already dodged that very attack, he reasoned that high in the sky, Ellie couldn't fight several people alone. He ordered the second necromancer to attack, but the second necromancer rejected his command. The second necromancer internally admitted he was only cooperating with them for the money. He confidently believed that he was the strongest one among their group. Although their opponent was skilled, he had already found Ellie's weaknesses. To exploit them, he commanded his own corpse knight, Vasilov, to jump. The knight leaped from its spine, dashing with immense speed toward Ellie. Just as it lunged, Ellie expertly flipped through the air. She used the spin itself to gain a foothold in midair. Propelling herself forward, she closed the distance with incredible speed. Ellie struck the knight's core with her powerful sword arm. The knight instantly turned to stone, its form now lifeless. The second necromancer was stunned, having not even made a move. Before he could act, he was suddenly teleported away. The first necromancer watched in silent confusion, the events unfolding too quickly. At that moment, the bat flapped its wings, changing the scene. As the ink dispersed, Useu noted vision-blocking tricks were useless against Eleonora. He worried her leg could now explode from the strain of using her leap. Furious, Kalina called Useu useless and told him to follow her lead. Kalina's knight then leaped forward, dashing in for an attack, but Ellie was too quick, effortlessly dodging by jumping over the knight. From the air, Ellie swiftly descended to attack the knight. Watching from the side, Callan was completely surprised by her skill. Even after losing limbs, the relentless knight continued to fight. Suddenly, a grotesque mouth extended from the knight's body toward Ellie. She deftly flipped away, narrowly dodging the bizarre attack. Ellie immediately countered, slashing the extended mouth with her blade. The knight's arm then transformed, revealing a barrage of hidden arrows. It fired the deadly projectiles directly at Ellie in a swift volley. The arrows flew relentlessly, closing the distance to her in an instant. But Ellie expertly deflected every single arrow with her sword. The necromancer felt overwhelmed, realizing they were just being pushed back. He knew their opponent was steps above them and considered surrendering. Kalina became enraged, finding it impossible that the boy was superior. She screamed, believing herself to be the truly superior one. A memory surfaced of her father calling her superior to anyone else. He had shown her the poor, asking if they were the same species. In the memory, a miserable Useu stood among them in the garbage. A young Kalina could only deny any resemblance to them. Her father explained that unchangeable ranks are imprinted at birth. He told her to live with pride in their superior, noble bloodline. Young Kalina simply agreed with her father's words. This teaching about her superior bloodline became her greatest pride. That pride became the root of her disregard for others. However, her father's business began to falter, and their wealth dwindled. As their fortune disappeared, a deep anxiety started to grow within her. Kalina never gave her all, fearing failure would disprove her superiority. She was terrified to face the truth that she might not be special. Instead, she gave little effort and looked down on others. She believed minimal effort was all she needed to surpass them. This was her way of hiding anxiety and protecting her self-esteem. But in the present, her companion necromancer was suddenly teleported away. He couldn't believe what was happening as he vanished. The one she scorned most now stood over her defeated knight. The most insignificant person was about to stand victorious above her. A truth she had ignored began to surface. She wasn't superior. Terrified, she realized this fact was being proven right before her. Her eyes widened in absolute, undeniable terror. In sheer terror, Kalina could only whisper a desperate denial. Ellie then sat nonchalantly atop the beheaded knight. She slowly raised her sword, ready for the final blow. Terrified, Kalina screamed, pleading for her not to do it. Ellie ignored her pleas and brought the sword slashing down. She beheaded the knight but purposefully left the core intact. Kalina was completely baffled, wondering why she had been spared. Useu explained that elimination would just make her a spectator. He wanted her to acknowledge him as a competitor. She was to watch as he stood above and surpassed her. His condescending words filled Kalina with a burning rage. He taunted her, telling her to struggle all she wanted. She shot back, questioning his desire to feel superior. She accused him of hating his own pathetic, disgusting existence. Useu glared at her, his anger finally showing. Kalina reminded him that superiority relies on making others inferior. She accused him of looking down on others to feel superior. She questioned if he was truly a different kind of human. Useu's stony expression did not change. Full of anger, he insisted that he was different from her. Kalina pointed, declaring she hated his detestable eyes. She revealed he had the same eyes as her father. Useu simply stared back at her. Without another word, he leaped onto the bat. They immediately flew away, leaving Kalina behind. She was left alone with her destroyed knight. With a twisted expression, she repeated her question. He thought to himself that he was different. He resolved that the world would soon know his greatness. He was certain everyone would recognize his superiority. They flew up and away, finally passing the spire. They surveyed their new, dark surrounding. A voice announced the final section, the intestines of hell. The announcer explained the final section, a simple 2 km sprint to the finish. The number of finishers quickly rose, increasing her panic. Useu realized they were barely in 1000th place and urged Nia to hurry. He desperately screamed for her to fly even faster. All the contestants were rushing desperately towards the finish line. They sped through the narrow and crowded tunnel. The path devolved into chaos as contestants shoved and fought. Useu demanded more speed, but Nia was already at her limit. Suddenly, without any warning, they were ambushed. A web-like attack slammed them against the wall, trapping them instantly. An attacker was trapping everyone, telling them not to get ahead. Trapped and furious, Useu threatened to kill the bastard who stopped them. Nia wondered if this was allowed, questioning the race's extreme rules. The attacker screamed at the other contestants to get out of his way. In a flash, the web-slinging attacker was sliced into pieces. Era's cat knight was revealed as the one who had intervened. Defeated, the web attacker was instantly teleported out of the race. Useu, recognizing Ira, asked how many knights she had consumed. He desperately yelled for Ira to free him before she left, but they ignored him, leaving Useu stuck to the wall in frustration. An announcement revealed that almost 800 people had already finished the race. Suddenly, Ellie grabbed onto Useu, startling him with her decisive action. With a powerful tug, she managed to rip them both free. Nia begged for help, but Useu regretfully told her there was no time. They sprinted away as the finisher count continued to climb, fueling their desperation. Realizing they were too far behind, Useu knew they had to use the leap. Ellie worried it might explode, but Useu insisted they must trust their luck. Putting her fears aside, Ellie began to focus her energy for the move. At that very moment, the scene shifted to another determined contestant. A retired necromancer mocked Borak, asking why he hadn't given up yet. The cynical words hit Borak hard, leaving him momentarily stunned and speechless. But instead of faltering, a newfound determination ignited within him. Elsewhere, Kalina pushed onward, repeating to herself that she would not give up. As she climbed, she was fiercely resolved to prove her own superiority. She focused completely on her goal, vowing to prove her immense worth. Back with Useu, he warned Ellie their communication would break if they separated. He reassured her that as long as certain limbs remained, they'd stay connected. He urged her to just trust him and run forward without any hesitation. Taking his words to heart, Ellie closed her eyes and focused inward. She prepared to dash as the announcer declared even more people had finished. Then, Useu's expression became intensely focused. He quickly performed a specific hand sign. In that instant, a powerful blue energy surged. Ellie began the race, dashing forward with incredible speed. She quickly overtook the other contestants in the race. Her momentum carried her swiftly ahead of the pack. As she leaped, Useu checked to see if she was all right. Ellie said she was fine. Useu noted 2 more leaps remained. An announcer stated 894. Useu warned communication might cut off. He asked if she could rely on her senses. Ellie was confident. Useu encouraged her, saying he trusted she could do it. With their trust affirmed, Useu focused his energy. Ellie announced her next leap, telling him to get ready. She firmly grabbed her leg, beginning to channel power. A moment of intense concentration passed between them. Energy surged through her leg once more for the jump. She then launched herself forward with incredible speed. Meanwhile, back at where Borak was, the necromancer felt his investment was wasted. He was reassured that his first attempt was still amazing. He agreed, but Borak questioned his talk of a next time. Borak wondered how he could smile, thinking about a next time. He couldn't believe there would even be a next time for them. An angry voice called Borak unlucky, insisting they weren't the same. The harsh words silenced Borak completely. His expression grew dark as he was lost in thought. He recalled his childhood joy in creating life forms people liked. That feeling was why he chose to become a necromancer. His first failure was painful, but it gave him hope. As his confidence died, this hope was the thread he held. He held on to that hope for a day, then a month. The hope carried him through an entire year. That hope stretched on for 10 long years. But looking back, only fragments of a now-hated dream remained. All that was left was regret and longing for past choices. Sweating, Borak desperately questioned where it all went so wrong. He searched for someone to blame for how his life turned out. He considered his partner but admitted he would have done the same thing. Was it his teacher's fault? No, he knew that thought was ridiculous. He realized the fault was his own, a talentless necromancer avoiding reality. The crushing weight of this realization brought tears to his eyes. Overwhelmed by despair, he collapsed, falling to his knees. He thought effort could bring blissful ignorance, but was that too much to ask? He questioned why he was given strong desire but no talent to match. His desperate, heart-wrenching question echoed into the emptiness. His frustration and sorrow poured out in a flood of tears. All he truly wanted was just one single moment to shine brightly. He slammed the ground, vowing he would do anything for that one chance. He cried, repeating that he would truly do anything for this chance. Suddenly, a mysterious voice echoed his desperation, questioning his resolve. Startled by the voice, Borak quickly looked up from the ground. Standing before him was a towering, goat-like monster. Despite the creature's appearance, a glimmer of hope sparked in Borak's eyes. As the demon looked back, Borak confirmed he would do anything. The monster then slowly turned its head, its gaze shifting away. Borak followed its gaze, which landed on his loyal cockroach knight. A sudden, chilling realization began to dawn on Borak. He slowly reached his hand out toward his silent companion. His palm came to rest on the knight's hard exterior. The cockroach knight stood completely still, seemingly frozen in place. But then, its eyes suddenly swiveled to look directly at Borak. Borak fell silent, a cold dread creeping over him. Borak unleashed his ultimate command, Annihilation Rush. Instantly, the knight's veins bulged with raw, immense power. Its entire body began glowing, turning intensely red-hot. In a flash, it launched forward with unbelievable speed. A powerful sonic boom echoed in the knight's wake. Meanwhile, Kalina was climbing, determined to prove her superiority. Suddenly, a brilliant red light flashed brightly nearby. She turned just as a crimson blur shot past her. Stunned, she could only wonder what that light was. A moment later, a massive gust of wind followed. Elsewhere, Ellie was skillfully leaping forward toward her goal. Her second leap was a success. She could see the exit. She noticed the communication line had suddenly gone silent. Sensing something was wrong, she quickly turned around. And there he was. Rhal was standing right behind her. She recognized Rhal, a former champion who had fallen far behind. She prepared to leap, knowing she couldn't afford to worry about others. If this next jump failed, she would be the one to die. She steeled herself for this final test of luck. At that moment, Useu unleashed his powerful technique. Ellie was also ready to test her own skill, but at the last second, her leg completely tore apart. She could only look down in absolute shock. Just then, a brilliant red light appeared before her. The streak of light shot past them in an instant. Ellie watched, completely stunned by the incredible sight. Then, that same red light engulfed her. The tournament spectators were left completely stunned by the display. They all questioned what they were even seeing. The entire event unfolded in the blink of an eye. An unknown contestant poured his entire being into an ultimate technique. His annihilation rush only slowed after the finish, leaving his knight broken. Its remaining passion and energy dissipated with sparks and light. The once mighty knight now stood completely charred and crisp. The crowd erupted, finally taking a keen interest in Borak's story. And so, the unexpected had happened. Borak, once hopeless, feared leaving behind a pitiful legacy. But his annihilation rush made him a star for the first time. Shining brightly, he had finally proven his own worth. The knight's incredible speed had left a path of total chaos. Despite injuring others, Borak was permitted to advance to the main tournament. With 984 finishers, there were only 16 spots left. And so, the preliminaries continued. Here, mental fortitude was more important than physical ability. The first one to recover his senses was Useu. His ears were ringing, and a piercing headache began. But this pain was nothing compared to his past trauma. That memory gave him the strength to keep running. His vision became blurry and unstable from the immense strain. Still, it was better than the disgusted stares he always endured. And so, despite everything, he was able to run. His legs were giving out, he felt he could collapse any time. He cursed those from his past, blaming them for his ruined life. He cursed them, his parents, and his own miserable life. He continued to curse his wretched fate. Despite everything, the shadow of his father loomed over him. His father's insults followed him, forcing him to keep moving. Nearby, Eleonora was struggling forward with only one leg. She scrambled ahead while the others were still disoriented. But soon, other contestants recovered and began to surpass her. They quickly started qualifying for the next round. With 995 qualified, Useu was in a dangerous spot. Just then, Useu turned Woong was calling out his name. Woong prepared to help his friend in need. Suddenly, Woong's frog tongue grabbed a startled Ellie. The frog knight powerfully swung its long tongue around. Then it launched Ellie toward the finish. Useu qualified for the preliminaries, finishing in 997th place. Perhaps, though, Woong's help wasn't even necessary. Useu couldn't understand why Woong, a competitor, would go out of his way. Woong explained that he'd achieved his goal and had no lingering attachments. He then revealed what he wanted to do next. He wanted to become Useu's #1 fan and cheer him on. Useu asked why. It was because he'd offered a simple handshake. Wung looked at Useu, wanting to tell him something important. He told Useu he was a much cooler person than he thought. Useu was confused, seeing Wung's smile even though he was eliminated. He simply couldn't understand Wung's kindness or his compliment. Useu denied being cool, telling him to just wait and see. He vowed to become the best, where no one could look down on him. With a determined look, he declared he would prove himself to the world. Wung promised to cheer him on. Useu said he would not forget. He told Wung to watch the path he would take closely. With his resolve hardened, Useu turned and walked away. Later, in the waiting room, Useu congratulated Borak on his victory. Useu apologized. Borak reassured him, admitting he would have done the exact same thing. Useu suggested they would have to fight each other if they both survived. He confidently declared his victory and offered a handshake. Borak paused, looking down at Useu's outstretched hand. Then, Borak firmly accepted the handshake. As their hands met, Useu noticed something was wrong. He realized that Borak's hand was trembling. Concerned, Useu fell silent. In this brutal battle, some emerged as victors, and, inevitably, others were left behind as losers. Filled with joy and sorrow, the preliminary round finally ended. The survivors were now moving on to a brand new stage. This next round promised to be bigger and more spectacular. The blood-soaked battle of the true necromancers was set to continue. A necromancer noticed a figure, wondering who it could be. It was the champion, the infamous necromancer named Kalen Crow. With Kalen Crow standing on stage, the tournament officially commenced. The Great War of the Corpses had finally begun. On stage, the CEO began addressing the 1,000 great necromancers. He sincerely welcomed everyone who had advanced to the main tournament. He told them they had proven their worth, and the world was now watching. This tournament would grant the winners immense wealth and fame. These rewards were for those with the will and talent to seize them. He urged them to fight with burning souls, as if it were their last day. The assembled necromancers listened to his powerful words. He then introduced the era's greatest necromancer, Kalen Crow. He announced she had a message for the challengers, but Kalen remained silent. Kalen coolly looked out over the crowd of contestants. A heavy silence fell over the entire room. She slowly brought the microphone close to her lips. With utter disdain, she simply referred to them all as bugs. Her brief message delivered, she casually tossed the microphone aside. Without another word, she turned and walked off the stage. Useu listened in complete silence. Players who advanced to the main tournament received several benefits. This year, they could even sign contracts with corporate sponsors. These sponsored contestants wore corporate logos, but were limited to only 4. Corporations held a showcase to fiercely compete for the best talent. However, some contestants failed to receive even a single sponsor offer. A disappointed contestant was seen leaving the showcase room. A guard then called for the next participant, Useu. The large doors swung open before him. Useu stepped inside, facing the corporate representatives. The sponsors on screen recognized him for breaking Rhal's wall. They felt his on-a-strike technique was a mismatch for their brand. Hearing their assessment, Useu showed his clear annoyance. He turned to leave, but a guard told him it wasn't over. Useu retorted he only came because he had to and wasn't interested. Useu declared that he would carry his own weight, alone. One of the sponsors found the young man's attitude intriguing. In response, Useu turned to face the sponsor. The sponsor asked why, wondering if Useu felt his efforts were being stolen. He explained they hired the guard, the best in his field. The guard also endured unimaginable training and effort to get there. Though their efforts were equal, the world would value Useu more. The sponsor then asked him if he knew the reason why. It was because behind Useu stood the power of a corporation, an industry built not on effort alone, but on countless sacrifices. He then sternly advised the young man to learn humility. Useu was shocked by the warning to avoid his father's fate. Enraged, Useu demanded to know what he knew about his father. The sponsor described a man trapped by the past, hurting his family. The sponsor called the man disgusting trash who blamed everyone but himself. He told Useu this man's blood flows in his veins, but Useu disagreed. Becoming frantic, Useu screamed he was different from his father and would prove it. Pinned down, he vowed to prove his worth, even sacrificing everything he had. The sponsor liked his determination, urging him to prove it with everything he had. He was told to burn everything he had down to white ash. The corporation that would sponsor him was called Berserker. Berserker was a pharmaceutical giant selling potions that pushed human limits. Through this new contract, Useu moved into a larger, cleaner house. He also received a new mask, replacing the cheap one he usually wore. It was a brand new mask that was custom made just for him. Ellie marveled at how comfortable the new bed felt. Useu told her to relax. She felt their lives were finally improving, rising up from where they once were. Useu expressed his deep gratitude, saying this was all because of her. Ellie simply glanced back at him, taking in his words. She offered him the edge of the bed if the floor was uncomfortable. He refused, insisting her comfort was the priority, and Ellie fell silent. Useu then took a moment to look around the room. The sponsor's chilling words echoed, promising he would end up like his father. The memory filled him with a sudden, visible rage. Elsewhere, Rhal slammed his hand on the table in frustration. He was furious. Fan mail and articles had plummeted, and press was all negative. Frustrated, he lamented that everyone was only focused on his recent decline. It felt like the entire world was against him now. His assistant suggested reading fan letters might offer him some support. Rhal scoffed, explaining letter volume just depends on his ranking in the fights. He doubted any genuine heart existed in those predictable numbers of letters. To him, they were merely numbers that shifted based on his ring performance. And right now, those numbers told him he was a pathetic human being. Hearing this, his assistant could only stand there in complete and utter silence. Resolved not to lose, Rhal demanded to know his first opponent's name. His assistant hesitated for a moment before beginning to announce the challenger's name. As the name was spoken, an utterly stunned Rhal froze completely in place. His eyes widened in sheer disbelief, the shock of the revelation hitting him hard. The main tournament operates as a tense, one-on-one, direct elimination contest. A single battle decides everything, creating immense excitement for the spectators. With 500 players eliminated immediately, the first match is the most crucial round. Newcomers get one chance to decline a randomly assigned match. Declining is a gamble, because the next opponent might be ranked higher, adding intense mind games to the competition. An assistant approaches Rhal to announce his very first opponent. He is scheduled to face a player by the name of Liviana. Rhal vaguely recognizes the name of the diamond-ranked player, Lightning Livy. The assistant emphasizes this impressive and steady upward climb. Rhal's expression darkens, a clear sign of his growing annoyance. He scoffs, dismissing her rank and demanding to hear the media's predictions. The assistant hesitates, revealing a shocking 90.5% probability that Sir Rhal is predicted to lose the match. Rhal becomes completely stunned by this unexpected outcome. He begins to sweat, feeling the immense pressure of the situation. Elsewhere, Liviana learns of her next opponent, Rhal. She can't believe she's facing the infamous Iron Wall. Her assistant confirms it, and she recalls his past tournament victory. But he mentions Rhal's recent losing streak, offering a chance. He reminds her she can refuse the match due to her lower rank. Liviana is conflicted, knowing she doesn't have to take the fight. She takes a moment to contemplate her difficult decision. The weight of her choice is clear on her face. Ultimately, she decides to fight for her dedicated fan. Her assistant expected this and hands her a stack of fan letters. She is amazed to receive 30 letters and even some gifts. She's touched that fans like Ms. Emma are coming to see her. She realizes another supporter, Mr. Baplov, will be there too. In stark contrast, Rhal's environment is tense and demanding. He wants to redesign everything to create the perfect night. His workers immediately agree, ready to follow his orders. His assistant asks if he's sure, noting his recent obsession with numbers. He reminds Rhal of his impenetrable wall philosophy, asking what he wants to prove. Rhal dismisses this, claiming that only the raw numbers are truly important. He believes numbers never lie, and they are clearly showing him he's falling. The falling numbers seem to constantly whisper to him, fueling his anxiety. His concerned assistant can only watch him in troubled silence. On the day of the tournament, the crowd roars with cheers for Libby. The stadium trembles as fans also begin to chant Rhal's name. Liviana thanks her fans, promising to give them her absolute best performance. She vows to deliver a truly spectacular and memorable match for them all. The fans shout their adoration, telling her she is cute and can win. Their energetic cheers echo through the arena, declaring her the absolute best. But as Rhal's knight appears, the crowd suddenly falls into a shocked silence. They point, wondering about the strange new design for Rhal's knight. It's a completely new design, no longer his signature impenetrable wall. Rhal believes his data created a perfect knight for offense and defense. He explains that by rule, the knight's core must remain visibly exposed. He placed the core on the head, the most difficult position to attack. To defend against aerial attacks, he added a movable shield hand. His data showed long-range attacks win more, dictating his weapon choice. The weapon is a destructive pendulum made from a dragon's calf bone. He also installed a weapon that can rapidly fire 240 bone spikes. Additionally, he prepared various weapon and defensive systems for close combat. He feels his data-driven design is perfect, and he will definitely win. His conviction is absolute. He is certain of his victory this time. With preparations confirmed, the announcer begins the first main tournament match. As the announcer shouts to begin, Liviana removes her cloak. Her body was damaged, with strained veins visible all over her skin. Despite this, Liviana prepares to unleash a powerful lightning strike. Her summoned knight immediately begins to charge a massive amount of energy. The brilliant energy swirls and accumulates near the knight's core. It then launches a devastating long-range lightning attack toward its opponent. Elsewhere, Useu discovers his next match is against an opponent named Papuri. Ellie worries, noting Papuri is a high-ranking emerald, and asks if he'll withdraw. Useu confidently states that with her by his side, he can't imagine losing. Reassured by his confidence, Ellie agrees that she feels the same way. However, Useu admits one thing about his opponent does bother him: her title. He reveals her unusual title is Fairy Queen Papuri. Unsure himself, Useu decides they have plenty of time to prepare before their match, and just like that, the scene shifts over to Rhal's match. He's completely engulfed by a massive lightning attack. He'd seen the immense energy coming right for him. He recalled his father's words: "The will to protect is the world's greatest power." His father, a stonemason, lived by that belief, always building protective walls. In an interview, a younger Rhal recalled his father working slowly, but more meticulously than anyone else. He remembered his younger self's feelings about it all. At the time, he had found his father's dedication utterly pathetic. Because his father was slow, he earned less and was never home. One day, while repairing a small crack, his father tragically fell to his death. He bitterly wondered what was so important about that lousy wall. Lost in the memory, he clenched his fist tightly. Back in the interview, the reporter listened intently to his story. He then recalled a catastrophic landslide that devastated the village after heavy rains. It was the Barrenos incident. Buildings collapsed, burying countless people and animals alive. For days afterward, groans could be heard from beneath the ground. But amidst the devastation, one thing remained perfectly fine. It was the wall his father had so meticulously built. The weight of this realization made him freeze during the interview. He then looked forward, a new intensity in his eyes. He recalled a wall that kept him and many others safe, sparking a realization. It was built by his stubborn father, who struggled to express his feelings. His father built it out of a deep love and desire to protect his family. This powerful memory was the foundation of his entire philosophy. The interviewer suggested this is why Rhal himself now builds walls. Rhal explained his desire to prove that a perfect wall could exist. A wall capable of protecting someone that would never, ever collapse. She praised his amazing conviction, noting his fans felt the same way. However, she warned that this rigid strategy could become a major weakness. She then asked what he would do if his conviction ever held him back. Rhal confidently replied that he knew exactly where he needed to fight. He finished his answer with a calm and knowing smile. But in the present, Rhal was completely stunned, frozen in pure shock. A devastating lightning attack had just struck his knight's leg. In response, he unleashed a powerful skill he called Abyssal Drop. Despite the damage, the knight fired a projectile in retaliation. But Liviena's knight was too quick, easily dashing past the attack. Suddenly, a storm of projectile arrows began to rain down. Liviena's knight was caught directly in the line of fire. Rhal was certain he had finally trapped his opponent. In response, Liviena prepared to activate a force field. A powerful energy began to emanate from her knight. A massive wall of lightning manifested, creating a protective shield. The incoming arrows disintegrated upon contact with the barrier. Rhal realized he must land his abyssal drops with perfect precision. Rhal initiated a new technique to attack. He pulled back the heavy anchor, preparing his strike. But the movement was surprisingly sluggish and slow. Rhal wondered why his movements felt so unnatural. Suddenly, Rhal noticed something alarming. His opponent was preparing a powerful lightning attack. The crowd noticed Rhal was being pushed back. They felt his performance lacked its usual solid feeling. Rhal's knight took another damaging hit to its leg. With the second leg gone, the knight began to rattle. Despite the severe damage, the knight stood its ground. He realized she planned to topple him completely. He resolved that she should not underestimate him. His knight deployed a smokescreen to obscure the field. Liviena's knight began circling its massive opponent. Liviena acknowledged Rhal's impressive skill with his new form. Liviena realized the bar showed Rhal's stored power, which was already depleting. She needed to disable its body, carefully timing her final lightning strike. Gathering her power, Liviena's knight crackled with lightning once more. A fierce cycle began, breaking a leg, then dodging a powerful counterattack. The two opponents were locked in a fierce, relentless back-and-forth battle. Liviena launched another powerful lightning attack, continuing her precise assault. Her strike found its mark, shattering another one of the knight's legs. With its support gone, Rhal's massive knight crashed heavily to the ground. Seeing the heart exposed, she prepared her final, decisive lightning strike. But Rhal wasn't finished. Vowing to use every last shot he had, both knights locked on, preparing for one final, simultaneous attack. In a brilliant flash, Liviena's devastating lightning strike was finally unleashed. Despite her powerful magic, the relentless barrage of arrows continued its assault. At that moment, Liviena Knight, who had only a little energy left, was completely depleted. Realizing her defense was failing, Liviena froze in absolute shock. Sweat dripped down her face, the immense strain becoming physically apparent. Her lightning magic wasn't enough. Arrows tore through the knight's defenses. In an instant, her powerful magical knight was completely destroyed, turning it into a Swiss cheese. Witnessing the destruction, even Rhal was momentarily stunned by the outcome, but his shock quickly transformed into a loud, triumphant laugh. After the match, Rhal gloated to himself, declaring that he was the winner. He mocked the critics who predicted his loss, certain he proved them all wrong. Excited, he asked his assistant what people were saying about his amazing transformation. His assistant paused for a moment, silently opening the official match statistics. She revealed the public saw him on the defensive for the entire match. The The consensus was that he only won due to Liviena's critical mistake. She noted no one mentioned his skill, citing the poor viewer reaction ratio. Without that mistake, she explained, the analysis showed he would have certainly lost. Hearing this, Rhal's celebration came to an abrupt and silent halt. His triumphant expression quickly soured, twisting into one of pure annoyance. As he passed a room, he overheard the sound of Liviana sobbing. Her quiet, heartbroken sobs could be heard from down the hall. He entered the room as she lamented her stupid calculation error. She sobbed that she could have done better, and he called out her name. Startled, Liviana turned around, her face still wet with fresh tears. She apologized to Sir Rhal, thanking him for the great fight. Rhal asked if she was crying from disappointment, calling excuses useless. Liviana clarified it wasn't disappointment, she was simply furious. Her unexpected answer left Rhal completely baffled. She explained, mentioning Mr. Frank, a fan who never missed her matches. She also mentioned her pregnant friend Dilla and shop owner Mr. Karelin. She couldn't show her loyal supporters her true capabilities. The thought of letting them all down was just so frustrating, she confessed as her eyes welled up with fresh tears. Rhal watched her, his gaze fixed and intense. He questioned her attachment, calling her supporters nothing but predictable numbers. Hearing his harsh words, she quietly wiped away a tear. She conceded his point, but believed in the sincerity of her supporters. She never believed for a moment that their encouragement was fake. Her gaze was filled with unwavering determination. She then asked Sir Rhal what he focuses on during a fight. Her question made him pause and think. He started to speak, but then hesitated, trailing off. He fell silent, lost in deep and serious thought. After a moment of quiet passed between them, with a bow of her head, she said her goodbyes. Watching her back as she left, Rhal felt a strange premonition. He sensed she would reappear, a sensation beyond all imagination. He was certain that someday, whether sooner or later, she would definitely appear before him once again. Meanwhile, at Borak's place, the scene was a mess. Dora stood there, completely stunned and speechless. She questioned Borak about why his place was such a dump. Why live like this after his successful tournament performance? Borak turned to face Dora with a troubled expression. He confessed he hadn't even attempted the Annihilation Rush since then. She couldn't understand why he wouldn't even try it. He felt the same sensation as his past failures. Unlike his first success, something now felt unsettling and wrong. Dora argued, but Borak was afraid of losing his new recognition. He was finally being acknowledged and sponsored for the first time. But Borak feared failing would return him to the trash he once was. Dora simply looked at him, taking in his words. She gently reassured him that he was never a piece of trash. He insisted she couldn't understand being left behind for 30 years. He felt like a lonely piece of trash, completely alienated from the world. Dora was completely shocked by his raw emotional outburst. He confessed he was too scared of returning to that life to even try. Paralyzed by fear, he admitted he just couldn't do it. Finally, the day of Useu's highly anticipated match arrived. The crowd roared with excitement, chanting Useu's name. Useu waved confidently, telling them all to remember his name. As fans called him handsome, Ellie just looked on, clearly annoyed. Ellie told him to focus, reminding him their opponent was skilled. Useu explained, Popuri always brings new strategies to tournaments. Ellie, confused, wondered what a furries was and why it was famous. Suddenly, a sight rendered Ellie completely speechless. Just then, Popuri let out a fierce howl. The crowd erupted in cheers, calling out for their queen. She turned around, revealing a shocking, beast-like appearance.
Drop a comment with your thoughts, and if you're into recaps like this, hit subscribe.